Welcome to GROGTALK, episode 6. Can you believe episode 6, Dan?
It feels like it was just episode 5.
I know, that's our running joke here. We need to come up with some new jokes or people are going to start, whatever subscribers we have will turn off. Though, just really quickly, in our game, I mentioned they were looking for doors. They were looking for secret doors. And
I'm an expert on doors.
Well, yes,
Did you know that?
your reputation precedes you because, as we read, if they detect the door, that does not necessarily mean they know how to open the door.
Mm-hmm.
So I started using that in the game, and one of the party members said, "Oh, you've been hanging around with Dan too much." So, I'm not sure I'm not sure who's worse, us that jibber jabber about doors, or someone's actually listening. So to that person who's listening, thank you for tolerating us for hours. So. Once again, I'm James.
I'm Dan.
And so today we're going to talk about combat, which is the third part of the main core of Dungeons & Dragons. We talked about exploration, we talked about encounters, typical non-combat encounters, and so most of the rules are based on combat. So we're not going to do any adventuring today because this combat could take up a long time, and then we'll have to discuss with Dan what Glade is going to do now that she is alone in the wilderness. Is she going to just limn her figures, or is she going to help with others?
Glad you brought this up because I have. I'm not gonna. It's not a complaint.
Okay.
You never have a complaint with the DM, right?
Is this the end of the show right here?
This is the end of the relationship. Pixie is a player character of mine, correct?
Yes.
Pixie, I should be able to play Pixie out. Like, we just assumed it was just Glade. Don't I get to play Pixie, try to escape, wriggle out of something, and
Of course.
Okay, so that's all. So my point is, I don't know that this relationship with Glade and Pixie is over. Because
Right.
I think I should get a shot with Pixie. Oh, and also, I forgot to tell you, apparently you didn't get the memo. Glade's going back.
Oh.
Glade thought about it, but we can talk about that
Okay,
later.
good. Well, I think that's I like the idea of her going back and trying to save. It was actually a little traumatizing hearing how her mental state changed from being optimistic and homicidal optimistic to being cowardly and shell shocked. So I'm glad she got her mindset back.
It's called the 1E effect. It doesn't take long.
She was gung ho and ready to go, and then running for her life out of the forest. Couldn't escape quick enough.
It swings. There's a lot of mood swings in 1E, right? It takes a week.
Right.
You get over it. That's why you shouldn't play. You need a week spacing in a 1E game, I think, to get re-energized. But all right.
Because so that's good. So then next week we will pick up the party will gather, but
the party will not gather. Well, Glade will be over here. It's really not a gathering.
That's right. It's more like solo adventures. The party will solo adventure. That's hilarious. But
I think so.
Well, very good. Let's talk about combat in our Word of Recall segment. So, Dan, combat has most of the rules. If you look in the core books, which of course for those who are live, watching the live stream or watch the video, the three core books that we kind of ascribe to is the Monster Manual, Player's Handbook, Dungeon Master's Guide, and of the vast majority of the rules in here discuss combat and the game, how to the magic items, how to fight, how to deal and adjudicate that. So, I'm going to just go over really quick. In a nutshell, the purpose of combat is after an encounter goes south, once it moves out of the discussion phase or talking phase, or both parties or multiple parties see each other and have decided the only way this is going to be resolved is through combat, and then basically both sides decide what they're going to do. Actions are announced. In the case of the party, they tell the dungeon master, each person says what their character is going to do. Then the order of actions is determined. And this is probably one of the hardest parts of this, because if you think in real combat, air quotes number one, everything's happening simultaneously, and so the game tries to use dice and rules and the abilities of the player characters and the monsters to determine who gets to act first in the order of that. And then the actions are taken, the effects of those actions are adjudicated. So if Dan's character is blocking and the monster's trying to hit, dice are rolled. We determine if the monster is able to hit Dan's character, just like the goblin when he swung his club. Was he able to get past Glade or Pixie's armor class, which is basically a representation of their ability to not be hit. And if it's not, then damage is taken, and if that damage exceeds hit points, and again, hit points is kind of this amorphous, nebulous concept of the ability of that character or creature to fight, and that those actions and reactions and spells get adjudicated, and we keep rinsing and repeating until one side decides they don't want to fight anymore, either because they're dead or because their morale is broken and they move on. So, as a new dungeon master, and we've talked in the past that you in your tier priority, I think you like social interaction, then exploration, then combat. How do you handle combat in your game, and what are some of the things for newer dungeon masters that they could think about before they, what are the biggest challenges and some advice that you would give?
And so I think the biggest challenges are simply, the biggest challenge is that it can be complicated. The more you do it, obviously, like anything, it gets easier. But that's what I stressed about the most. When I came back into the game after so long and knowing that I was going to have to DM if I wanted to start up a group, it was stressing about running combat. And so the hardest part is just knowing all the rules. Now the nice thing about it is, I think the DMG does pretty much consolidate the rules of combat. They're long, but it spans around, I think, the 70s, page 70 or so, right? And all on. I mean, I think it starts before that, probably. Yeah. Right, it starts in in the 60s. It's long. So that's the hardest thing, is it can be complicated. I think you just got to start doing it. So I think you just have to start running combat. If you have to look stuff up, you have to look stuff up. Lean on the players sometimes to help you out if you need it. But that was the hardest thing for me, was just knowing all the rules. And I still don't feel like I know all the rules real well. And I don't know if I know we talk about playing by the book, but I think if there's some things that are not followed, oftentimes it is rules in combat, and I know I'm sure we're going to talk about that.
Yep.
Things like weapon speed are not often used by party members, and the adjustment based upon the type of weapon and the AC. But so that was the hardest thing. But don't panic. It's actually not that bad. It's not that bad. And most of the time, unusual issues aren't going to come up, has been my experience. There's so many rules. Some of them will come up every now and then. But your typical combat with a goblin, the rules are pretty easy.
Exactly. And if you are a new dungeon master, this is where understanding the module, starting with a beginning module. I know it's tempting. A lot of folks want to start with higher level monsters and games so that they can enjoy some of the features and benefits that the game has. But if you're inexperienced, start with the first level module, start with first level characters, because their choices are limited and the actions that can happen are limited. They can attack, they can run. There's not a whole lot of additional rules. And then as the game continues, you can add on more rules.
This is the one thing you don't want to hear as a DM, in my opinion. The player says, "I attempt to grapple."
Right.
What's up with that?
Oh, you know what? I totally forgot about that.
Oh, well, we don't know what don't count on me to talk about that.
Yeah,
Why are you writing that down?
Well,
put next to that, James.
That's under rules, rulings, and house rules, because weaponless combat we could spend 2 hours on that. Forget about the rest of it. So,
and if you thought the doors discussion was exciting. Wait till you hear about wait till you have the grapple podcast.
I really wish you had, you have a major area of study, doors. Maybe weaponless combat could be your minor study.
Oh, that would be horrible.
Because I would like, that would be something.
So it's got to be somebody's. We need that person to, I don't know if we're going to have Collins at some point or something. We need like a grappling expert to make it. For that podcast, we need to find, if you're a grappling expert, I don't mean in real life.
Right. That doesn't help us here.
No. If you're a grappling expert, and you're good at you got to be good at explaining that. If you're a grappling expert but you're terrible at explaining, we don't need you.
Right.
We need someone who can dumb it down.
Well, what we'd like is during the call-in, if we had like a chat, which I'll turn on at some point, if during the party gathers segment where you're actually playing, that segment you would not attack with weapons. That whole time you would just you would have to either overbear, which is you basically try to knock someone over, grapple, grab them, or punch them. It's the only actions. And then in chat they would tell us what to do because I have no idea.
So it'd be like a wrestling match.
Right.
That sounds fun. Okay.
Well, as you're trying to get through doors, you could then wrestle with each other.
Okay.
I like that. So, as Dan said, in the Dungeon Master's Guide, and in the Player's Handbook, they both talk about combat. In the Player's Handbook's at the end of the book, but in the Dungeon Master's Guide, it starts on page 61. Combat encounters, combat and initiative. So, again, this is all in the DM's Guide. And, it just reminds me of when I first acquired this book, in the early 80s, that it was just, to me, fascinating. I think later editions probably organized the rules better, but this kind of encyclopedia type of feel that there's just random articles of information. So before this, there's discussion about waterborne combat and airborne combat and underwater combat, which is like, oh wow, that seems very advanced. And then they actually get into combat. So you start on page 61, and it helps you transition between an encounter, which does not necessarily have to be combat, into combat. And the first thing you have to figure out in the game is are either party or multiple parties aware of each other? And if they're not, the party that knows about the other, are they going to do something? And that's called surprise. And surprise is, again, one of those that is not as easy as you would think it should be. And basically, each person or creature has a chance to be surprised, and they have a chance to surprise people. And you have to then determine, based on their ability to surprise and their chance to be surprised, to figure out how much time the party, if any, has to react before the other party does.
And if I could just point out that the surprise rule in first edition is deadly.
Mm-hmm.
Because, as we'll talk about, if a party's surprised, they're going to be surprised for a number of segments.
And what's a segment?
Well, a segment is 6 seconds, but the problem I don't want to say problem, there's no problem.
There's no problem.
The rule in first edition is that a party member who's not surprised can engage in an action that would ordinarily, a combat action, which ordinarily would encompass the whole round.
Right.
So if they're surprised for 2 segments, the non-surprised party would get 2, assuming they have 1 attack per round, right, would get 2 attacks.
Exactly. With
the other side never even getting to respond.
Exactly.
And some creatures surprise more often than others. I think, is our giant frogs 1 to 4, I think, or something like that?
Bugbears, there's a few that are really, they surprise much more likely.
And the problem here is, you then, a party member, could be surprised for 4 segments, correct?
That's right.
And which would mean that the other creature would get...
Well, I think for 3 segments, right? Because,
But if you're not surprised, if the other side's not surprised at all.
That's right.
You're surprised. So if the bugbear's not surprised, and the other part, I think they could be surprised.
Up to 4 segments.
That's 4 segments, and that's 4 attacks. So you could die. So you have a bad surprise roll, it could be the end of you, particularly when you're low level.
Exactly.
That could be it. So surprise is particularly deadly. Now, my understanding is that surprise can be adjusted. So in other words, it doesn't always have to be according to the DM. Okay, each one of you, this side and that side, both, we're going to roll for surprise. That there's some situations where, because of noise, so let's say the party is clanking down the hall, because of course they're dragging that chest full of 1,000 copper pieces.
Right. Or they were unable to open the doors.
They're unable to open the doors, exactly right. So, and this is where, I think we talked about last time, or whatever time, the famous doors episode, where if you try to open the door, you can try again.
Yeah.
Try. It's not like what I think the bending bars, lifting gates, you get to one shot. Try again. And if you fail, so who cares? Well, you care because you're making noise, which means that now, when you open that door, you might be surprised, and the other side, I think in that situation, the DM would be completely justified in saying, I'm not at all rolling for surprise for the other side. As a matter of fact, they're going to be standing on either side of the door. Only you, party, roll for surprise.
And vice versa. The party observes the goblins, in the case of the adventure, the goblins are sitting eating. Glade and Pixie saw them.
Oh, okay. I thought that was period. They're eating Glade and Pixie. I'm like, is that what's happening to Pixie? Pixie's been eaten.
Well, that would be a short role playing. I want to play out.
Girl, that sounds like a lot of. I know you do. That sounds like a lot of fun.
I want to play out Pixie's thing. Okay, he wakes up to realize he's being cooked alive on the brazier.
That sounds okay.
What would you do now?
Right.
I'll die. Okay.
It's a mini module.
It's very short. How much time?
We should publish that.
That's right.
You wake up.
Here's your character. Let me take it back.
You wake up. It's not one of these ones where like the excitement is escaping.
Right.
No, you're
just dying.
You're just dying. Welcome to first edition. If this bothers you, you're not ready.
Right. Did you not like that module? Okay, go take the books back wherever you put them on eBay.
Yes.
Just give them eBay link.
Yeah.
Sell them to us. So, I think we need to just step back just a second, because when we talked about exploration and encounters and searching, typically the time in Dungeons and Dragons is broken out into various words. Turn is a time of period for 10 minutes. A round is 1 minute. So 10 rounds equals 1 turn. A segment is 6 seconds. So 10 segments equals a round, 10 rounds equal a turn. And so when you're in the dungeon, time is moving actually very slow. You search this room, it would take 10 minutes. In the game yesterday, players always roll, I got to search one 10 by 10 foot area, and it takes 10 minutes. Yeah. So think about this room.
Dan doesn't make us do that.
That's right. Well, they don't say that.
Okay.
There's just general lament. Boo.
Yeah, it's interesting. They're not playing each other off, because usually like parents will do
right.
that, I don't get a lot of, James doesn't make us do that. James lets us roll maximum hit points.
That's right.
Okay, that's good. That doesn't happen. I'm giving them an idea now.
And first of all, the maximum hit points came because...
Is that Unearthed Arcana?
No, Unearthed Arcana. They were given that when they came into the game. I didn't give that.
I gave them that. And it's hard to take back.
That's right. One the parents let them do it. The other one...
I was adopting. I was trying to build a group. Mm-hmm. And so I'm trying to... I was so thrilled anybody showed up to the first game.
We have Dwarf Paladins and Elf Ranger,
So this is what happened, is I did all these things. It was like Christmas, right? They come, and I'm trying to get a group together. So, yeah, max hit points? Absolutely. Level limits? What are level limits?
Exactly.
Can I be a dwarf? Racial, restrictions on class? What? I don't know anything about this. And then I handed the group over to James.
Yeah.
And he got it. And then I became a...
That's right. You're the grandparent.
Tough guy.
Yeah. Exactly.
I was a grandparent, and now I'm the parent. And I'm like, yeah, okay, roll your hit points. And we had a player who one of their games was a ranger, and 3 hit points.
3 hit points.
Starting ranger, and he died and he quit.
Yeah, pretty much.
No, he wasn't a ranger, is it?
He was a ranger.
Oh, he was a ranger, and he quit, yeah.
Well, then we had another one. We had a thief who had 3 hit points. We've had both.
That's what it was. That's what I'm thinking of. But yeah, the ranger. No, yeah. The other one was just. Is that the one who was eaten by the? No, yeah. The thief had the 3 and quit. Yeah.
But both of them had 3 hit points. Both of them died horribly.
You're right.
And both haven't come back since that. Just something to think about.
Is that a pattern? It's only 2. That's not statistically significant.
Well, 2 out of 10, I would say so, but okay. So the game slows down from a time perspective when you're into combat. But some would argue it doesn't even slow down enough. So each round, a combat round, is 1 minute, and a bunch of things happen. And so we had a situation in our game yesterday where 3 of the party members, there was this hallway that was filled with the bodies of dead ogres and giants, and the fighters were trying to climb over, and then they saw other ogres and giants that they were going to fight. So the non-fighting party members were like, well, let's search for a secret door on our side of the pile. Well, by the time they searched one time, the combat was over. It took 10 rounds of fighting. During that time, they were searching, the 3 that were searching, 2 fire giants were killed, 3 stone giants were killed, 1 of the player characters were killed. So the time differences thing. So you have to be careful of whatever the actions of the party are doing may not fit in their time frame. So that's probably the lesson number 1 when you're dealing with things. So in surprise, the time that the party that has surprise is limited to segments. So even though while combat, you can fight as quickly as you can, certain other actions you cannot do. So for instance, even though you have 4 segments, you can only move your movement of 4 segments. You can't move 4 rounds of running. if a spell takes 4 segments, takes 24 seconds, even though you have 4 segments of surprise, it still takes all that time. You don't get to cast 4 spells.
You're not speeding up time.
Right.
You just get to whack somebody a lot.
Right. Because the concept of combat is, and this is again in Gary Guy and Dungeon Master as Gary Gygax describes this, is people go, what do you mean I only get 1 hit in 1 minute? That's crazy, right? We're fighting.
Mm-hmm.
Don't I get multiple hits? And the answer is yes. The idea is, it's like swashbuckling. There's multiple parries and thrusts and everything else, but only 1 hit has the opportunity to affect the other player, the other monster. And as you get better, you get multiple opportunities. So the idea is if I was surprised, Dan's character could hit me multiple times because I'm not parrying. I'm just standing there. So he's literally can attack 4 times during that 4 segments. So surprise is very deadly. Not only for that, your missile weapons go off. If you have a notched weapon, a notched arrow, you can shoot more. There's a bunch of things that can happen. Your armor class is typically less if you're surprised because you don't get your dexterity bonus. You're not agile. Basically, you're flat-footed. Bad things happen.
Oh, and we should mention here, because I think this is often forgotten, it is by me, which is that although you do party surprise, right? So that's important to mention.
Yep.
That you don't do surprise on an individual character basis. The party will roll. So let's say that the party is surprised.
Well, let's do this. So Glades and Pixie and the goblins, they are normal. So it's.
You gonna kill them again?
I don't know.
That's what you're gonna do.
So in this case, goblins are surprised on a 1 and 2, and they're surprised on a 1 and 2. Pixie and Glades we'll just say for argument's sake, they're not a ranger at this point.
Right.
And an elf, they're 1 and 2 and 1 and 2. So if I rolled a 2. Dan's party rolled a 3. So the goblins are surprised, and they are surprised in this case for how long?
It would be for 2 segments. The number on the die. So
That's right.
2 segments, and I rolled a 3, so my party isn't surprised at all. And this is where it's interesting because it's actually worse to be surprised when you roll. It's always bad to be surprised, and it's worse to be surprised with a high roll.
Yeah.
So a 2 is worse than a 1 on a surprise roll.
Yeah, it's very odd how it is, and it's counterintuitive because in some parts in page 61, it talks about surprise dice difference. So in this case, 3 to 2, it says lost segments would be 1. But then other places, it says just what Dan said later. So, that's one of the areas you're going to have to kind of adjudicate how you want to do it. Because in one of the examples, where it gets complicated is when one group has less surprise or other.
Yeah, and as you know, I've read through it multiple times, and I think there's actually a mistake in the DMG, and I'd like
what?
It's hard. Well, it was clearly somebody typing it for Gygax. It wasn't Gygax himself.
No,
Okay,
that's
it
not
was
right.
not. It was clearly somebody working.
Well,
for
you
him.
mentioned there's an errata too somewhere. What?
There is an errata. It's in the Dragon magazine. I can't remember. Do you know the?
No, I don't.
I don't know.
But
But
I'm gonna have to look that up.
Yeah, for I think the 3 core books, there was an errata for all 3.
So maybe it was corrected in there.
So you only do the way I read the rules on 61 and 62 is you only do the surprise dice difference if both parties are surprised, right? So if you look right above the surprise dice difference on 61, the little chart, it says if both parties are surprised, then the effect is negated or reduced.
Yeah, and that is the part you're exactly right, and I keep forgetting that part because the reason they have that, it's the sentence is kind of buried in there, and then they have this big chart. So
Right.
of course, your eyes gravitate towards the chart and not
Right.
reading that.
Right.
So, and this is at least the 4th time he's told me this.
So it wouldn't be, and I think this may be the only, I'm very proud of this, because I think this may be the only time that I think I knew something that maybe,
I think there's been a few times, but this is when you were clearly correct.
Well, I read it multiple times. So my understanding is, so I get a 3, you get a 2.
Yes.
You don't do a 3 minus 2
Right.
for a surprise of 1 segment. I'm not surprised. The goblins are surprised. The goblins rolled a 2, so they are surprised 2 segments. So each of Glade and Pixie would get
2 actions.
Two
segments.
2 segments
to act.
which would be 2. I could do 2 attacks each, which that could be, well, obviously with Pixie and Glade,
Right.
it would be 4 misses. But
Right.
if this is normal combat with a normal die,
Yes.
a normal dice rolling, that could be the end of the goblins right there. Now let me point out to you. So let's say you had rolled a 2 for the goblins,
Right.
and I, as the party, had rolled a 1. Now we're both surprised.
Right.
You're surprised 2 segments, the party's surprised 1 segment. Then you do the difference, which means Glade and Pixie would only get 1 segment of surprise, which makes complete sense.
Right.
Now
but it's so completely. Here's the problem with the dice in first edition. If you just have to memorize, it's kind of like music or some of these other things. When you roll for initiative later, the higher is better. When you roll for a surprise, the dice, the actual die roll itself, each one may be better or worse depending on what you roll.
And ability scores. Check. Low is better. So you will often in times have people getting ready to roll a die, and they'll say, now, is high good?
Right.
Or is low good?
Now, but you can, as a dungeon master, use that to your advantage. So if you have players who kind of do this, and, I rolled a 20. Or, they're on the other side of the table, and you can't see what they're rolling. By them not actually knowing, maybe this was a mechanic that he put in, he would just say roll a d20. Mm-hmm. And they're like, I don't know.
That's right.
Why am I
That's
supposed to
do?
I want high or low?
Mm-hmm.
Or do I give a 10 and hopefully get a 50-50 shot? Because, I have the characters roll percentages, and for some things, percentage is good for making an ability, but for reaction, high is good. So that is a challenge. If you just have to memorize these things. So go ahead. I'm sorry about that.
Oh no, that's fine. I just wanted to point out now what I think is the error to make things confusing.
Yes, that's good.
If you look at the top of page 62, there's another chart.
Yes.
If you look at the last 2, party surprise and monster surprise, notice what we see. The parties died. The second to last, the penultimate, is party rolls. I just wanted to show off.
That was good.
Thank you. Parties roll as a 1. Monsters roll as a 2. What should happen there? Who should be surprised? Party rolls a 1, monster rolls a 2.
And they're both surprised on 1 and 2?
Well, Party A is surprised on a roll of 1 or 2, while Party B is surprised only on a roll of... You solved it. It's been solved. I think that's the thing.
But isn't that before that? That's after that. And on the bottom of the 61.
Oh, wait, you're right. Is that example for... Oh, wait, you're right. Assume the party characters come upon a monster. They have 2 and 6. No, it hasn't been solved.
That's right.
Because then it's the colon. So now, look, the penultimate one. Who should be surprised? Party rolls a 1. Monster rolls a 2. And you're right. That example below was not for that one. It's both 1 and 2. Who should be surprised?
They both should be surprised.
Well, they are both surprised, but I think what they mean by who's surprised is meaning the difference, right? So if they're both surprised, I think they then convert it to only one surprise, whichever one surprised more.
They should be flipped around.
Exactly. And the second one.
If you're using the item that's above that says if both parties are surprised, then the effect is negated or reduced. So yes, it should be the opposite way.
Right, and we know that you are surprised by the amount on your die.
Right.
That's it. So, and I posted that question in places. I think Dragon's Foot, online.
See, no need out there, folks, to worry about that. Send your questions info@grogcon.com. During his door explorations, Dan will post these on Dragon's Foot or other places to get. No need to do that. Just send it to Dan. Dan will get it.
I'll handle it. So yeah. So I think so. You talk about that creates confusion.
Yeah.
But all right. But so that surprise actually shouldn't be too complicated.
And so the rest of it, the other part that is an advantage, it's hard to adjudicate, and this is hard because people just want to fight. And the hard part about surprise is there's a lot of figuring things out at an individual level. Because while the party is surprised, there are factors so certain races and classes of characters get better chance to surprise, or they're less likely to surprise. Monsters have better chance to surprise, so you then have to figure all this out. There are monsters who only get surprised on a 1 and 8. There are monsters who surprise on a 7 and 8. And so what I've come to is I basically convert it to percentages, because once you get past 1 to 6, it just becomes very difficult. And you have to subtract and add, and then you have to reconvert it back to segments, which are, again, on the D6. So the point of it is how complicated you want to make it is up to you. You could just do it as simple as rolling the D6. Each person rolls a D6. I roll, in this case, maybe lower one gets surprised for one segment, or if you do surprise like I do, if the party's surprised or or the monster's surprised after you figure out what their abilities are. They're surprised for basically equal to 1 round. They don't get 10 attacks; they get one. They get 1 segment, just to make it simpler. Because, as Dan said, you have to figure out how likely the party's to be surprised, how likely the monster is surprised, and then if each character or monster, if they have a dexterity bonus or penalty, that has to be added to their factor as well.
And that's what I want to talk about that. And I think there was a good article, I believe, in Dragon Magazine on surprise. It may have just been surprise exclamation point. I can't remember, where they talks about converting it with the percentages. Yeah. And are monks, is there like a...
Yeah, monks get reduced.
Percentage? It's a percentage, right? It's not a, which makes...
Well, because 2 and 6 is what, 33% chance. And then they took that 2 and 6 chance, which is 33%, and started reducing it by level.
Right. So if you're going to deal with percentage chance of surprise, I think you probably really need to read that article. If you're going to play by the book, you need to read that article in Dragon Magazine to wrap your brain around it. On
page 30, the monk says, at first level experience, a monk is as likely to be surprised as any other character, 33 1/3%, which is 2 and 6. The chance goes down to 32% at second level, and it thereafter goes down 2 points per level. Why would he do that? So, and then it goes, so etc. So then so this is their chance to be surprised versus surprising. So with this, the other thing is, creatures that can surprise better are at a more advantage than creatures who are less likely to be surprised. It's not a 1-to-1 thing, So for instance, if you only get surprised on a 1 and the monster is surprised on a 1 to 4, it doesn't mean you're 1 to 2. It's actually still better. It only reduces it by 1 to 3. So if you still rolled a 3 in this case, you still would be surprised for 3 segments. So it's always better to surprise higher chance than it is to be less likely to surprise. So it can be complicated. That's the rules as written. A lot of people simplify it by just using a single die or using some way to adjudicate it, saying one side surprised, everyone's surprised, and then they go into the next phase.
Can I ask you a question? Because players always want to try to eliminate their chance of being surprised. So they say things like, we're walking up very quietly, we're very alert. How do you handle that? So let's say that, there is no door to the room coming up, right, and you've got, 2 goblins on the other side, and they say, well, I'm being very alert. Do you take that into account when adjusting whether they're surprised or not?
I do not.
I don't either. The players don't tend to be big fans of that rule.
Right. Well, it's this kind of, the players will, and part of it the DM tries to do too, is to try to speed up the game. We kind of assume certain things. It's like, well, I'm always checking for traps, or I'm not. And again, if you have to keep calling for it, then there's rolls and the game slows down. So the idea is, well, we're always trying to be stealthy. Well, that's assumed you're not trying to bang noises. But if you say everyone is stealthy, then you're diminishing the characters who truly have that ability.
I agree with that, because I think that roll itself takes into account sort of this idea that you're being stealthy. So the 1 and 2 is the fact that, I don't know, maybe you had an itch. Exactly. Maybe something made a little noise and you looked over there. Those chances that something happened, that even no matter how stealthy you are, there's still a 1 in 3 chance that you're going to be taken unaware. So,
right.
No, I agree.
And the idea of that a paladin who's in full plate mail, whose idea is combat and battle, is going to be as quiet as the halfling thief, and that as an aggregate, they're almost like the halfling has a cone of silence that envelops the paladin. Like, now we're all quiet. No, the paladin's still moving in 70 pounds of metal that's not set for being quiet. Whereas I don't know if it's in this game, in this book, Dungeon Master Guide, but the monsters are typically quiet. They are quiet creatures for most, unless they say they make a lot of noise.
And there's always the guy in the party who, of course, is mapping and saying, right, now, how wide is this hallway? Right. How many feet have we? Where does this? Did we take a left? Right?
Right.
If you think about it, I actually think this idea of mapping for the actual player character to really be mapping, I find it just hilarious.
Right.
This idea that they're
they have graph paper and they have stencils. Yeah, no, it's they're basically, who knows what they're.
I dropped my pencil.
Right.
It goes rolling. Where
the piece of coal that they're using, or a quill. I mean, right. You can buy a quill. Yes. So they get out their writing desk and they're.
This is the first thing you do when you're the DM. This is how you send the message to the players that this is serious. Is when they start mapping and they're in the dungeon. Right. You say, "Do you have a quill?
Right.
Do you have parchment?" And they're like, "No, you're not mapping.
You're not mapping.
Give me that graph paper." And then
take it from.
And then you do the action grapple rolls because give me that. Unhand me.
then you
it's actual grappling.
Yeah, but there's 8 of them in one of you.
Exactly.
And that's not good.
So one of the things before we leave surprise, which we really need to do because we got a lot of other things to talk about, but is don't forget about the dexterity bonus on surprise.
That's right.
If you have a high dexterity, then you as an individual player character, so let's say the party's surprised for 2 segments. If you have a high dexterity, so let's say you have a -1, I can't remember where it kicks in, it tends to be pretty high, then if you're a -1, that would mean that your character would be surprised for only 1 segment instead of 2. If it was a 1-segment surprise for the party, you wouldn't be surprised at all. I think it's fair for the DM to rely on the players to remind them of that. Right. So if you've got a dex bonus, I don't want to keep track of all your dex bonuses. If they're surprised, and you got a high dex, you tell me, hey, I'm not surprised, for 1 segment or for 2, whatever it is. And now, I think we've talked about this, and the general understanding, it's never mentioned for sure, it's alluded to in some examples, is that if you are not surprised when the rest of the party is, that just means you don't get attacked, but you don't get to do anything yourself.
That's right.
That's why you play it, right?
Well, and take it one step further, is that you then, as the Dungeon Master and the players, have to say, okay, the goblins, or let's say in this case, the goblins surprised Pixie and Glade. They both try to attack. Well, and how is that adjudicated? I said, well, one goblin goes against each of them. Well, maybe against Glade, who may have a higher dexterity, they can't do anything, but against Pixie, because we know he has only a 13 dex, which you've mentioned 4 or 5 times. You can't believe he only has a 13 dex as a thief.
Yeah.
So then you have to figure out basically surprise at an individual level. The party that's surprising, they go after someone. So would the goblin go after someone who's not surprised? Or would they only go after the ones who are surprised? So it's not clear how you're going to adjudicate that. As the Dungeon Master, I basically would say, there's not a big counter on the person who's surprised saying I'm surprised or not. They're just rushing in.
Right.
So but you want to use that on the player side too. Well, we're surprising this guy. Well, that goblin or that fighter wasn't surprised, so you get up to him and you lose your attack.
Agreed.
So that's some of the nuances in the game that's not. So surprise is definitely a challenge, but again, it's part of the reason the dexterity and the other things. One of the players are always going to want to be able to do everything. They want to be stealthy. They want to fight first. And in first edition, there's really a sense of this is a team game. Each person has a role. And some people are better at things than others. Especially you get new players, they want to attack first and jump first and search this. And that's why you have thieves, that's why you have fighters, and people who have high dexterity, they have an advantage in surprise. So, okay, well, that's surprise, and it can be as complicated. You can make it as easy as I roll 2 dice, I decide you get surprised in this, and whoever gets surprised, you kind of act as one round, or you can work through it. There's going to be some scenarios, and just the more you do it, the better you'll get at. So let's just say, for argument's sake, in this encounter between the goblins and Pixie and Glade, both parties are not surprised. And we kind of saw that in the scenario where I think it was Glades was looking at them and was going to shoot them or something, doing hostile action. Even though she thought she was being stealthy, she did not, and initiative started at that point. And so, because this combat is basically happening at the same time, we don't really know who goes first. Initiative is an opportunity to figure out what order of steps happen. So initiative is very simple in first edition. It's a party initiative. We don't do individual initiatives typically. I'll say that with an asterisk because there is later, if you get to advanced combat, in advanced Dungeons & Dragons, there are some individual things you have to deal with. But basically, the party rolls a d6, the Dungeon Master rolls a d6, highest thing runs.
And before we do our roll for initiative, can we talk just briefly about something we've already alluded to, which is declaring action?
Yeah. Oh, that's right.
Because I think that's very important. So it's never mentioned. I think it's alluded to somewhere in the DMG, but it's not listed as in terms of combat and the steps. I don't think there's a declare action step.
No, unfortunately not.
I think declare action is very important. So before you roll for initiative on each round, the Dungeon Master should go around the table and ask each player what they are going to do.
It's on page 71.
Oh, thank you.
Actions during combat in similar time-important situations. So, the activity of player characters and player character-directed creatures must be stated precisely and without delay at the start of each melee round or before the appropriate divisions of other situations where exact activity must be known. If you are a stickler, you may require all participants to write their actions on paper.
Yeah,
That would be amazing. Conversation regarding such activities is the same as if player characters were talking aloud, of course. Delay in deciding what is to be done should be noted, and such hesitation will basically mean that the individual is not doing anything whatsoever. Basically, you are delayed. And, that's a style of play that I don't do. That's a style of play that Dan doesn't do, but that's certainly a legitimate style of play. What does your character do?
I try to do.
Okay, what are you doing? Basically, just cut them off if they don't, because the idea is you don't have a lot of time.
I've tried to do that at times. So what you're going to have happen, and I think it should be done. So what happens a lot is that, roll for, you come upon 2 goblins, roll for surprise. Okay, neither party surprise. Declare action. And you go around the table. And what often happens is that a discussion ensues amongst the party. Hey, Jim, do you have you've got holy water, don't you?
Right.
Jim, yeah, but holy water doesn't work against goblins. Okay, well, you know what I'm going to do is I'm going to go around. I'm a thief. So you cover me while I go around.
It becomes, and that's the tension. Go ahead, Dan.
And it just drives me crazy. It's not a war game.
Well, that's it, isn't it?
Right? So to me, to have some of the flavor, I think Gary Gygax was spot on that. And so I haven't done that a lot. I've done it every now and then. If there's real delay, you may recall I had one where, I said, well, the hobgoblin gets up and starts running. And a discussion ensued about what to do, and I'm like, he's gone.
Right, and I think that's fair.
Yeah, because they're talking about. So I think
they had captured a bugbear, and after the fight, I'm like, oh, he disappeared. Wait a minute, what do you mean he disappeared? You all were fighting.
Right.
You weren't paying attention to where he was. He's a bugbear. He's a quiet, these giant quiet creatures. But I think that's why I'm glad we're going through this, because I definitely think I've always played it. It was more of a Final Fantasy tactical combat kind of thing. Right, you stop the thing. All right, it's like a
pause.
Yeah, like football. You sell. Okay, you're gonna go behind the post. I'm gonna throw it to you.
You huddle up before the combat. The goblins are huddled over here. You're huddled over here.
Okay, break. And then basically the snap of the ball, and everyone does.
Well, you're not surprised. So both of you can be neither surprised. They both be like, hey, we're
perhaps that could be the next. That could be part of the style of play when initiative happens. They roll initiative. Everyone knows, okay, you guys won. We understand that. They huddle up.
What'd you guys get? We got a 6. We got a 4. Okay. All right, you got the ball.
That's right. You go first.
We'll get on defense.
We figure out, okay, now we're ready. Okay, we won't move. All right, go. But, that is kind of absurd. But some of the rules lend itself towards tactical advantage. And then there's the argument of, well, these party members have worked together as a group, and they're like almost special forces that they've learned the tactics, so the characters would know their actions. It's unfortunate the players are having to translate what it is, and it almost you could say, well, maybe they come up with 5 tactical execute defense move alpha where they all have preformed that, which is also kind of absurd. But that is, I've tended to see most first edition games playing not like this, more like, okay, you declare action, and you have some time to declare action and figure out a party game style.
I think, and I'm glad that you talk, of course, the style you referenced. I think it's, at the end of the day, I guess it's based upon what your party wants and the style. I think it'd be very nerve-wracking to do the style Gygax talked as a player,
right,
to do the style. But at the same point, I think it would add real urgency to things. It would replicate more what it's really like. Exactly. It's fast, it's furious, and I think that might be a lot of fun. So what you should, whether you
and deadly, by the way. I mean, if you have people who don't know what they're doing, or not, and we'll talk about tactics later, strategy for combat in relation to first edition, that would definitely it would challenge your experienced players, but it may end your beginning players, because if they don't know what they're doing, as the dungeon master, you have some. This is the tension. As a dungeon master, you know more rules than most people, most likely, and you have the advantage of knowing what all the creatures do, and you have a good understanding of the place. So you have it's not a fair fight from that perspective. So sometimes that's why I allow some more discussion, but if combat is becoming boring and rote, where they're just mowing through people, this is a great opportunity to insert that in and throw in some chaos.
Yeah, I think what you can do is, I think you can have a happy medium. So I think the way I basically do it now, I think, is if I believe you are abusing things, you are spending too much time thinking about it, I may give you a segment penalty. Or if there's too much conversation, I'm going to be like, look, fast, fast, fast. So I guess I sort of give them a the leashes has some give to it, but at a certain point. So
I've seen people use a timer. They have a timer and they put that down.
I have timers.
There you go.
I have, but they seem so mean. I haven't actually
pulled
them out.
You should do that. That'd be great.
So I think what you should do for declaring
action. We have too many players in our group. You should just start putting the timer down.
Yeah.
Talk or get out.
Right. So you should do declare action, and I think we've talked about this before. Something I picked up at the conventions I've been to, which is where DMs would have this concept of someone's in the box.
Yeah.
Which is that player, whoever's in the box, they will both roll for surprise and initiative. They will also declare their action first, and then you go around. I think most people are going to go around clockwise, and then once they lose an initiative roll, then the in the box would move to the player to their left, and then you would have them declare action first time. So it's not always the same person having to say. It's nice to be last on declare action. You hear what the other players do. So.
It's kind of like the dealer in Texas Hold'em kind of thing. And that's some of the other things, because if you do that, if you enforce in the box and you enforce quick things, then you don't get the thing of, okay, I'm going to wait until your fireball goes off and then I'm jumping in, or I'm going to wait to see if you're killed. You can, but definitely in Dungeon Master's Guide it talks about, doing nothing is very bad. You should better to do something. And again, if you're a stickler, they would write down their specific actions. I'm going to attack the goblin. If Dan's character killed the goblin, then okay, I just run over to the goblin. He's dead. Now I wasted my action. Players hate that. They hate it. Hate it.
Hold up your action. Everyone looks around.
Right.
Oh, what? Oh, you're.
That's right. Say it again.
Fireball.
That's right.
I'm charging.
That's right. Yeah, and so if you have players, I think I have some players like that, but my group is too large and too diverse where I could get away with that. It would be, there would be a lot of anger as bad things happen to players with that. So initiatives, actions are declared, and specifically the biggest action that's important that you want to capture. I tend to be: are you going to attack? Are you going to move? The one thing that must be declared is if a player is going to cast a spell. Because if you thought spells casting was fun, Dungeons & Dragons, magic is great. Oh no. Casting spells in combat is a very dangerous thing, because basically you cannot move, you have to be immobile, and so if you have any dexterity bonus to protect you or anything, you're basically standing still as you're waving your hands and uttering and fumbling for your material component. And if you're hit before the spell goes off, that spell is not only does it not go off, but the spell is ruined. You've lost it for the day, and you're very likely as a magic user not to have a lot of hit points. So that's one of the facets of the game from a strategy perspective you need to understand. So everyone's declared their actions, and an initiative is done. So we can roll initiative. So I'm the goblins, you're the party. I rolled a 3.
I rolled a 4.
So the party's doing great. So
high is good.
High is good in this case. See, it's right. And so there's 3 outcomes that can happen. One side, assuming there's 2 parties, 2 sides, 2 fights, the monsters in the party. There's not a third group, which again, that's even more challenging. The players could win, the monsters could win, or it could be simultaneous. And simultaneous brings in a lot of rules that you have to deal with that you don't have to deal with when the group wins. So basically, that happens, 1 in 6 times that you could get simultaneous. So that is a great flavor, but from my perspective, and we'll go over simultaneous, but like surprise, is the detail and the crunchiness worth the time it takes to figure it out, unless everyone's willing to do it. So you've won initiative, your party, so you have a number of actions. Let's say you've declared them. One of the first actions you could have done is parlay. You do not have to fight. You could basically say, I'm going to use my action to parlay. And so what would be some examples of that? I think you tried that with one of the goblins at some point. You may have tried it done before the combat, but parlay is basically what?
My good goblin, how might you be doing today?
That's right.
Speaking goblin, hopefully.
Exactly.
Or hopefully the goblin speaks. So to parlay is to communicate, to talk.
To negotiate, that's
to
right.
To negotiate. And we should mention, too, I want to make sure we don't forget to talk about multiple attack routines and how that affects initiative. But back, just bookmark that. So back to parlay. Yeah, to parlay is to try to negotiate and avoid combat. And I think that, well, I was going to say, I think these rules are not used enough. I think they're not used, it depends on your DM and the type of game. If you've got a game where, all evil creatures are going to attack you and you'll have no success, then there's no point in it. But, I've seen references in modules and things like that where that the goblins can be bribed.
Right.
The bugbears can be bribed. So it's worth trying. It's always nice to have a little extra coin.
That's right.
And you might think that this is pathetic. I mean, I don't know if I can necessarily see a paladin paying off a goblin, but
in my game, I mean, again, what paladins are all over the place. I'll just say they've been negotiating with 100 orcs because the enemy of my enemy is a friend of mine would be the only.
Well, and that's probably a fair interpretation. I don't know necessarily that the paladin is a death wish. But it's
way more fun when they do.
Because paladins can flip. That's another podcast. Paladins. That's a whole other podcast.
That's a series. Really.
It is a series.
Am I right? So
you are right. So I think that it is, if in 1E, if you run into some baddies, I think it's worth, first, if you've got the coin and you don't want, and you've got a mission. Your mission isn't to clear out the dungeon. You have a specific mission. It's worth trying to throw some coins their way.
Right.
See if they'll take them, or negotiate with them. I mean, there are times in which you may have competing factions within a dungeon, and you might be able to join, like you said. The enemy of my enemy is my friend, or whatever. Join with them. So I think players should think more about this option.
And it talks about on page 63 that the party with initiative can always elect to do some kind of communication. Then what would happen is there would be a reaction roll typically, unless in the module it says the monsters will automatically attack, or the circumstance. A group of elves in this case interacting with goblins. Very likely the goblins are not going to listen to parlaying; they're just going to attack. So what's interesting, and again, players hate to waste their initiative on talking. So it says, it's common for player characters to attack first, parlay afterwards. It's recommended that you devise encounters which penalize such actions so as to encourage parlaying attempts, which will usually be fruitless, of course. So,
That's great.
Yeah, so it's like, please encourage something and then make sure it's discouraged, It's really throwing that thing up. Don't allow a trope to work all the time. So if you let parlaying work and it's, oh, that's great, then the goblins actually go, we weren't going to fight you. Oh, here's Alyssa. I'm sorry, we were actually waiting for you guys.
Can we join your party, actually? Right. Where are we off to next?
That's right. Where are we going? If that worked, then they talk to everyone, and of course, when they fight the white, and they're like, hello, Mr. White, please don't level drain us, and they suck them up, and then, the idea is to keep throwing up. So parlay is definitely an option, and I think it becomes more an option when the player characters are either want to role play a certain way, or when they're not as in good a shape as it is. Because, like we talked last time, most players, they know it, but they sometimes forget about it. The good stuff is at the end of the module. Anything between that point they start to the end is lessening their chance to get the good stuff. So smart parties will try to avoid damaging themselves or injuring themselves till they get to the end. Parties that are not as disciplined, they just kind of go all over the place and they fight everything, and so at the end they're hoping. And as the dungeon master, you have to decide, do you want to penalize not smart play by saying, I had assumed the party was going to be ready to go when they fought the boss, You know, in the module that you ran, before I started, the module calls for a bugbear to be at the end.
You know, that's a good point, and I hadn't thought about that until you just said it now, which is you're absolutely right. Which is, I think, you know, when I look at an adventure and I see the big bad at the end, I assume the party is walking in with full hit points,
right,
all their spells. But you're right, a lot of times they just
stumble into
they're limping in. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. We're just going to go in this room and rest. And they open the door and they're, oh, you've come to my lair. It's like, oh, crap.
It's on.
That's right.
We try to parlay.
Yeah, that's right.
We'll be your slave.
That's right. You know, and so one of the things they ran into a storm giant in the event. And again, we checked for surprise. They weren't surprised. You know, they recognized probably something that could cast lightning bolts and had 2 giant 60-foot creatures was probably not something they wanted to mess with. A little metagaming there, but still, you know, they decided to parlay as opposed to attack.
My all-time favorite, not metagaming, is when John was playing. Was he saying it? I don't know. I think he's an illusionist, a gnome illusionist or something. And again, you come across a vampire.
By the way, we were first or second level when we fought a vampire.
And Dan was running a published adventure.
Yeah, we should do
Dragon
the podcast.
Magazine.
That's right, Judge Dragon Magazine and you.
Hey, you did so. John, well, I really, you know, my character wouldn't know much about vampires.
That's right.
And all I remember is, I think, casting a color sprays on the table.
Right.
He cast a color spray.
Eviscerated by the vampire lord.
The vampire took a bite out of the gnome, and that was it. So that was a bit. I applaud the non.
Exactly.
James metagamed, and James was like, "We're running. We're still running. We ran all the way back to town."
That's right. I don't even know how we get out. We're running. You know how those cartoons when they
yes.
run through the wall,
all different directions and everything.
And they just run through the wall. You see the silhouette.
Oh yeah, there it is.
They just run through it.
Right. Exactly.
I just kept running.
Yes. All right. So that's
So that's parlay. So then one of the next things you do, because part of what the dungeon master has to do is determine, as a dungeon master, you have to determine where the monsters are or the enemy party is from the player character's party. They may not be right, you know, in circumstances you open the door and they're right there, but in other circumstances it's a wandering monster. Like for instance the creatures that Pixie and Glades saw in the forest, these 15 flying things. I had to figure out how far they were, and then if they don't have a way to attack at a distance, you have to move to close. You have to somehow you have to get together. So if, let's say in this situation, the goblins were farther away than the abilities for them to attack, your choices would be 2. You could either stay, or 3. You could stay where you're at, which is not that great usually, or you could move to close, or you could charge. So maybe you can describe the difference between move to close and charge.
So my understanding, move to close is, you know, moving into melee. And if I recall correctly, in order to engage in melee in that combat round, you have to be within 10 feet. Do I have that right?
That's my understanding, yes.
So if you're outside of 10 feet, then unless you're going to you have a ranged weapon and be firing at the baddies, you would then say, I move to close, which means that in the next combat round, you'd be able to engage in melee, unless you chose to charge. Right? So if you charge, I can't remember exactly how, it looks like you have to charge with it. I don't know how, within what distance you need to be, but you're going to close quite rapidly, and you'll get an attack when you otherwise wouldn't. But it could be, there could be some danger to that, right? You have you don't get your dex bonus, I think?
Yeah, so like you said, closing the striking range. This merely indicates that the party concerned is moving at base speed. So each character has a base speed, and for humans and characters, it's dependent on their usually 12, and then depending on what armor encumbrance they have. So they can move basically 120 feet in a round. And this is on page 66, and the base speed is in inches, and again, that's back to the wargaming kind of background where Dungeons and Dragons came from, indicating tens of feet. So if you can move 12 inches, you can move 120 feet, because the idea each of these squares on the map is 10 feet.
Oh, and that's where I see it says in that paragraph under close to striking range, this action is typically taken when the opponent is over 10 feet. It drives me crazy, but the 1 inches, of course, means inside. Not out, it means 10 feet.
That's right.
10 feet distant, but not a long distance away. So it sounds like that's the rule. That's the sentence, I think,
That's
that
right.
everyone uses to say you can't attack if you're beyond 10 feet.
Yeah, and I allow for, so, and again, in first edition, you can move, you can attack, but you can't do both. There is no move and attack, and that drives people crazy too. I want to move a little bit, then attack and move. No. You have one action primarily, and that is you can either move or attack. So moving to close is the goblins and the humans are the parties more than, let's say, they're 40 feet away. Now what it doesn't talk about is there's no such thing as a guard action. Well, I'm going to sit here and wait for the people to come towards me, and then I'm going to attack. There is none of that action. You basically, if you guys want initiative, your choices are to sit there,
right,
or move up, and then you wouldn't get your attack unless you charged. And charging, you get double your movement, you get a +2 to hit, and you don't get your dexterity bonus, and your armor class goes up by 1.
Right, creatures with no dexterity bonus become 1 armor class lower. So is it cumulative, or so if you don't have a dex bonus, you just go down 1 on your armor. So if you have your dex bonus, you lose it.
Yeah. If you don't have it, then you get 1.
So it's one or the other.
That's right.
Got it. And then you want to have a long weapon.
Right. So this is another part of this is the game. Now the initiative changes. So even though you have initiative, if so, for instance, so Dan's character says, I see the creatures, I'm charging them. And I'm charging this goblin. Well, once he declares charge and he wins initiative, then whoever strikes first is dependent on the length of the weapon. So in the case of the combat, you had a longsword. The goblins had a club. I'm pretty sure a longsword is longer than the club. Your character would go first.
And that would be in the player's handbook. I'll be right. The
That's
list
right.
of weapons will tell you
length. That's
the
right.
weapon length.
And you can only charge once every 10 rounds or once a turn. So you can't just be charging all over the place.
Oh, you can only do it how often?
Once every 10 rounds.
Okay. It's charging's pretty good though. I know you use it a lot. I think it's pretty good. If you have a long weapon, it's a pretty good thing to do.
It kind of is, because people hate to just move and just say, okay, now I'm in front of you, now hit me. It gives them an opportunity to do it. So that's on the top of page 66. Only one charge move may be made each turn, thus an interval of 9 rounds must take place till the second charge. So, and I've ruled that sometimes the charge, only the players can do that. It's a player skill. And in my game, I feel like fighters should have, because fighters are they don't have a whole lot of fun things they can do. So I allow them to charge more often than other group things, because why would a magic user be able to charge the same amount of times as a fighter? So again, that's a house rule, up in quotes. But at rules as written, characters can, creatures can charge once per turn.
And so the +2, it sounds like, is only if you survive any non-charging or charging opponent's attacks which occur first. So you don't get the automatic +2. So if you look at 66,
yes,
charging creatures at melee at the end of the charge. Charging creatures gain +2 on their to hit dice if they survive any non-charging or charging opponent's attacks which occur first.
Right.
So it sounds like you don't get a +2 if you go first. If you have the longer weapon, it sounds like you don't get a +2.
No, I think that meant the opponent with longer weapon attacks first. Charging creatures gain if they survive any non-charging or charging attacks. So, for
which
instance,
occur first.
Right. So if the bullywug or the giant toad was jumping on you, charging, let's say, or I'm charging with the you have the sword, but the goblin has a spear, and instead of that,
right,
he would not get a +2. He would attack you first,
right,
and then if you survive,
right,
then you get your +2.
Right. So in other words, so if I have the long sword and you have a dagger and I'm charging you,
you get +2, and you'd go first.
Oh wait, I thought I don't get. I only get +2 if I survive the non-charging party's attack
I
first.
would go. Yeah, but that's assuming I go first. In the case, weapon length determines that first.
Right, so I've got the long sword. Right. I go first.
In the case of the dagger, you go first, you get +2. But if I have a spear, which is longer than that, you'd have to survive my attack. Because again, if I'm setting my spear, I could do double damage to you. And then if you survived it, then you would get that.
Right, I get the +2 if I survive
right.
the other party's
attack.
First.
Right.
If they went first.
If they went first because they had a longer weapon.
Right. Correct.
I don't get a +2 to hit you.
Correct.
Because I'm standing there. You only get +2 because you're charging.
Oh, but I don't think I get a +2 if I'm charging. if I go first. So if I have a long
No,
sword,
no, no. You always get the +2.
or it says if.
If you survive it, meaning, so again, not to belittle this down, I'm the goblin, I have a spear. You're attacking me with a longsword. My spear would go first. I would get a normal attack against you. If I have it set to charge, then I would get double damage. So I may kill you before you get a chance to hit me. But if you survive that spear attack, then you would get +2 to hit.
Okay, so I always get, all right. So
you always get a +2.
Okay.
The only thing you may not do, so for instance, another example is, let's say you're next to another monster, and you decide I'm going to charge after the magic user, who has a staff, and because I'm worried he's going to cast a spell. You get an opportunity attack, like you learned from me, and and then you try to attack the magic user. If the magic user has a spear and can attack you first, you would get 2 attacks before you get a chance to be attacked. That's the idea. You have to survive the thing.
Okay.
That's how I read it. But I'm sure you can go and figure it out, and someone else has another version. So charge is a very valuable thing. But so next we have you're actually just attacking. You're in range, you're within 10 feet of each other, and you make your melee attack. And you alluded to, so yeah, let's figure out how to actually do an attack before we talk about things. So one of my suggestions I'll talk about later is you can use, there's tables in the Dungeon Master's Guide which determines how to hit, and they're on page 74. So 74 and 75. So in this case, I'm a goblin. My armor class, which is my numeric way to determine how likely you're going to hit me, is 6. Glade is a first level ranger and a first level cleric. So I would give Glade the advantage of whichever table is best for her. So for armor class 6, first level fighter is a 14. For a cleric, first level is a 14 as well. So basically, clerics without any bonuses for strength or anything attack at the same level as a first level cleric, first level fighter. In this case, you need a 14. So if he didn't have any other adjustments to either better or worse, he would need a 14 to hit. He would roll his dice. You can roll it. 13. Now, if he was charging, he would get +2 to hit. So you'd add 13 plus 2 is 15. So that is the advantage of that. Now, if you were to roll your damage, let's say you did the D8.
Okay.
Right? So each, in the player's handbook, it lists all the weapons and their damage, and damage is usually broken out by small and medium has one set of damage range, and large has another. Some weapons are better against larger creatures. Some weapons are less efficient, but generally, larger the creature, the better it does. You did 4 hit points on the goblin. Let's say the goblin survived.
Am I a ranger?
Yes, you get 1 + 1 for that, so you get 5. So let's say the goblin survived. After that charge, the goblin would then use his club. Your armor class is 8. No, now it's 5 or 6. He's a up to 1.1 hit dice monster. He would miss. So that's how that scenario works. So you could envision this in your mind's eye. They see each other. Glade charges with her sword. She strikes the goblin, and the goblin is unable, swings overhead, missed, and that's the action that we saw. Now, that changes a little bit how the idea of this one round, all this stuff happens, but basically what you could see there is Glade took the whole round getting close to them and striking. So that's the basic attack. And, any of the flavor that you add of where you hit and everything else, there's nothing mechanical to it. It's just to make it a little bit more than I hit, you miss, I hit.
Yeah, my understanding is somewhere in there where they talk about hit points, Gygax says that player hit points are not, when you lose hit points in combat, it's not actually wounds and gashes. It's more just a weakening down of the character, and then when you hit the death number, it's kind of like the death blow. You've been weakened and the death blow is struck. But with monsters, it is, in fact, actual gash. So, not that should change the way you describe combat, because, we talked about that in a Fire podcast about it's fun to describe the combat and where the blows hit. And so, the one thing is if you really wanted to play by the book, I guess when you were describing combat and you're saying the goblin hits, you wouldn't want to talk about gashes. You just talk about it's like, you're being weakened down significantly by the goblin.
Right.
As opposed, but I don't think that's a big deal.
I think that's, that was a I don't know if it was an innovation of Dungeons and Dragons, but this idea of hit points, it seems definitely unreal. And again, there's always that scenario of how does, a 10th level fighter somehow survive a 20, 50-foot drop, whereas you and I, if we fell, well, this is a fantasy game.
Yeah.
And the idea is the reason they're 10th level is they're lucky or someone's looking out for them, all their skill, all these other factors that take into account of it. And just the ability to quantify your luck, experience, skill, toughness, all this is like it or hate it. There's lots of other ways to do it, and other people have grappled with it. Or you can just accept what it is. And what the way they describe in the Dungeon Master's Guide is, this is a game. They have mechanics to make the game go as smoothly as possible without having it ground down with more details. This is already crunchy enough. There are systems that came out this time which are even more crunchy. More, I hit a certain part. If I get through your armor, you'll have characters whose arms are broken and they can't do anything. For me, better to be dead than have a guy whose arm is lopped off. And that's always that tension between a game that's a little more abstract and the game keeps going to where you get the real, how much realism do you want in there. So that's melee attack. The other choice is, of course, a missile attack. So let's say in this scenario, it's actually Trixie because Pixie, he always seemed to be the one charging into combat. Let's flip this around. And actually Glade decides that she is going to use her bow and shoot at the goblins. So one of the big advantages of missile weapons, particularly bows, is they shoot twice, versus most characters up until they get higher level get one attack. So you double your rate of attacks. So a fighter with a bow is way more deadlier than a fighter with a longsword. But what's the problem in this scenario if Pixies run into combat and Glades has decided to start shooting? What happens? What's the challenge there?
Well, so the challenge is, and I guess in part it depends on how the DM plays it, but I know that once a character is in melee,
right,
if you have another character shooting into melee, then there is a decent chance that any hit is going to hit, it's going to be friendly fire. It's going to hit the other party member. And I know that there's a fairly long explanation. It looks like you've pulled up the page number.
Page 63.
63, where you basically, my recollection is the percentage chance of hitting anyone in the melee is based upon the size, right? Smaller creatures are given a less chance, medium, and then large, of course, are given a greater chance. And I think you actually have to count up the number of creatures, identify what size they are, and then you figure out sort of the chance.
Right.
And then you roll.
And then you figure out and then you figure out the hit. So I love where it says, likewise, discharge of missiles into existing melee is easily handled. And then there's a giant paragraph to describe how you would have to do that. And so basically the gist of it is shooting into melee. It's not this idea of Robin Hood who's shooting the apple off the pinpoint arrow. You're basically firing into, and because this other idea, which is hard if you use miniatures, that you kind of have this static, like these shield walls hit each other and they're just bashing on each other. The idea is the party, people are dancing around and they're parrying and they're moving, and so the archer is trying to anticipate a shot. They really don't have a shot. They're basically just firing into this maelstrom of people fighting, and so the only thing that matters on who they're going to try to hit is how many creatures there are, their size of them. You come up with a percentage, you roll that percentage, and then you say, actually, you've shot it. You're not shooting at the goblin. You're shooting into melee. And that's, I got to keep reminding saying that way. Yes, when they say I want to shoot the goblin, no, you're shooting into melee. There are two small creatures, there's one medium creature, so you basically have a 50-50 chance of hitting Pixie or one of the goblins.
Yeah, that is an interesting way to phrase it. You say, no, you're not firing at the goblin. So your action is attacking the melee.
Right.
You're attacking the melee, and it's not terrible. So it's, and I'm just reading this, right? Small is 1/2, medium is 1, and large is 1.5 times.
Right.
So if it is, so like you said, I assume a goblin's medium. They're pretty small, but I assume they get medium.
They're small.
They think it's small?
Yeah, I think they're dwarf, they're gnome size. But go ahead.
So if they're are gnomes small? So if they are
gnomes are
I know. Okay. So if it's just 1-on-1, it's pretty easy. So if it's a goblin,
they're small, 4 foot tall.
They're small. So if it's a goblin and a human, then it would be right. It would be a one half.
Yeah, 1 1/3, because each get a half a unit. So there'd be 33% would be the goblin, 2/3 would be the human.
Exactly. So I guess you roll a 4-sided, right? 1 and 2, you hit the goblin, right?
No, 4. No, it'd be D6. 1 to 2.
No, so I mean 3 to 6, right? 1 and 2, the goblin. 3 to 6.
Correct.
Right. So it's
That's
not.
one way to do it. Yeah.
It's actually not terrible. But yes, so that will discourage sometimes players from shooting. They won't like that rule. But that's
usually it's the beginning person. The person hasn't played before. Oh, I take out my bow and shoot at it. Like, okay, great, you shoot in there. Oh, you just shot your friend in the back.
Right. I'm not coming back.
And
see you later.
And they leave.
They leave. I'm getting a drink.
Both leave.
Why is he taking his books? They both leave. That's right. They both leave.
They both get up. I'm tired of getting shot.
No. The guy who got hit, when he sees the other guy getting have to leave, then sits back down. It's like, okay, well, if he's going, I'll stay.
And so I've done it different ways. I've given people cover in that scenario where, so if a dragon, in this case, a dragon gets the same chance to be hit as a bugbear because they're both large. Well, a dragon's much larger than that, or a giant's much larger than that. A giant can be 15 feet tall. Do you really have the same chance? In that case, what I typically do is I just let them roll. If they roll really bad and missed, that's when I change it based on how lucky or how well did you hit. If you missed terribly and you're going after a giant, perhaps you hit one of your friends.
Well, here's the good news. You're playing by the book. We'll go all the way down at the bottom. If one opponent group, this is one opponent group, not a creature, is significantly larger than the other. Accurate missiles will have a small. You may assign a minor chance of miss. So I take that to mean that you could do that. What you're doing is fine. I mean, why
always
couldn't you
allow
do this
Archfighter to hit a giant or similar creature against a human or smaller opponent?
Oh yeah, there it is on the last one. Yeah, I hadn't noticed that one because I just saw the group was larger. But you may assign a minor, right? But this writer, for instance, always allows archery hits a giant. I'm just reading what you said. But so I guess the bottom line is if you can adjust it as you see accordingly.
Yep. Okay, so then we have spells. Spell casting is a key component when we talk about strategy. But spells are in the player's handbook. There's casting time, and when you first, if you didn't have the Dungeon Master Guide, you did cast time segments. What does that mean? So fast spells take 1 segment. They take, magic missile. You shoot that missile, it takes 6 seconds to cast that spell. Faster spells are always better because spellcasters who are casting a spell, if they lose initiative, they get no dex bonus. They're basically just sitting there waiting to get walloped.
And I've done this. This happens where you declare an action. You say, okay, I'm going to cast Animal Friendship.
Right.
This happened recently.
Yes.
And I think I've done this. Right. So it's very easy to have this happen. You declare it. It sounds great.
Right.
And then you open the book up. And the DM says, well, what's the casting time? And that's like, 3 turns or
it's
something?
Like 3 to 6 turns. So it takes an hour. And, okay, this is what I'm doing for the next, 600 segments.
So yes, so the lesson is, I think it is very important if you are a spellcaster to be aware of how long your spells take casting time, because that can really make a difference.
Yeah, and this is where new players, you want them to play their character, but they have to read their things. They just say, oh, I'm going to cast that. And you're like, well, that takes 3 rounds. That takes 30 rounds. Takes 3 rounds. The battle could be over with that. So they need to really understand their things. And so I tend to allow players, as long as it's not completely broken, okay, you're able to cast it, but you can't do it that way going forward, because you want them, you want people to be encouraged.
Because otherwise you'd be, good news and bad news. The good news is you now have a leopard as a friend.
That's right.
The bad news is the leopard's dead.
That's right. The leopard was killed a long time.
It's just you and the leopard. The party's gone. The sun is set. Where is everybody?
Heal.
Why is he not learning? The book says he'll learn tricks.
That's right.
Why is he not?
3 tricks.
Oh,
exactly.
One thing too that I was curious about was I like spell components. I know no one plays with spell components. I think they're fun. I think they're wildly entertaining. I think they're funny. Is that as best I can tell, the segment time includes grabbing your spell components. I don't think this is very realistic. I think a 1 segment, if that's 6 seconds, you're fumbling for your spell components. But as best I can tell, there's nowhere in the book that says if you have material spell components, and not all spells do, that although you're supposed to get those material spell components, you get them out of the fold in your cloak or your robe, that it's still just one segment, right? That I don't think I've ever seen a DM say, no, I'm going to add segments for you to fumble around and get your spell components.
Well, it says the casting time is the time it takes. It doesn't say if you have to be prepared for it. The other question is some of these get consumed, these spell components. Other ones say you just have to have them. Well, it doesn't say do you have to hold them in this case, or you just have to have them on your body. It's really is casting time shows the number of melee rounds or segments of a melee round required to cast a spell. Remember that some spells require additional time preparation. So, it doesn't say specifically the spell, for instance, create water, which takes 1 round. So don't create water that takes a while. The spell requires at least 1 drop of water to create and a pinch of dust to destroy water. So do you have to throw the water somewhere? I think that's where the player, if they really are role playing, they should help the dungeon master and kind of think about what that is. We tend to hand wave some of that. The other idea is that they would have pouches on their belt and they would have them labeled. And part of the thing is, you could argue, well, at night when they're resting, they're doing they do quick draw with
they're practicing
the prismatic wand, the crystal thing to do their hypnotic pattern, or their rose petals, right? Rose petal or a pinch of sand is right there in their pocket, and they can just throw it out with that. Why not? I mean, it's a fantasy game, and this is where that tension of I like components too, players hate them, and generally, like we had a Raised Dead. I didn't hand wave that you need to have a diamond of 5,000 gold pieces.
Oh.
That is the material component that they had. Now, did they have it? I think they had some diamonds. I don't know if they were 5,000. It may have been more, but I remember them having some diamonds with that.
And my understanding is that the spell goes off, correct me if I'm wrong, on your segment that your party has initiative, right? So let's say I've got a 1-segment casting time. I don't get to go immediately.
Correct.
Right? I got to wait in line like the rest of the party, correct?
So in the case of 3 and 4, Dan's party rolled a 4, I rolled a 3. Dan's actions start on the 3rd segment. The Goblin's actions start on the 4th segment.
So it actually matters what you roll. It's not just higher versus lower. It matters what number you roll.
So so in spell casting. So if I had a 1-segment spell, in this case the Goblin would run up just before they hit me. You cast Magic Missile. The Magic Missile would hit. But if you were casting Hold Person, which is a 5-segment spell, if I remember correctly, then that would go off on the 8th segment. The Goblins, if they were right next to you, could still attack that player because it took longer than the time it took for them to. The strike would happen before the casting was over, and even though they won initiative.
And if they hit, of course, they disturb the spell.
Right.
So it really, so that can be rough on the poor spellcaster.
So spellcasting in combat is nerfed in using what the cool kids say.
What does that mean? I don't know what that means. That's like a soft football.
Yeah, softball. That's right.
Is that where it comes from?
That's right. It's a soft football. That's right. So it's less powerful than.
Oh.
That's what it's nerfed.
Because to me, nerf is a good kind, like Nerf football.
Right.
But they're more, it's like
no,
Nerf
it's
football.
not as good.
Oh,
it's not as good as it should be. It's nerfed.
I loved the Nerf. Okay.
Yeah, so you learn something every day. So spells, that's why smart magic users and smart clerics will use magic items. One of the great things about items is their ability to be used in combat. It's a wand works all the time. You say the command word and it works. There's no as long as you're alive, that wand of magic missiles will work.
And wands, as I understand it, wands, you direct it right at the recipient, right? So I can usually I don't need to roll it to hit.
That's right. And wand of magic missiles, it's just like a magic missile. It automatically hits.
And I think other wands too, right? Isn't it generally, unless it says otherwise?
Well, wand of lightning would be a lightning bolt, and it would do this thing.
But I don't have to roll it to hit. They may get a save.
Right, exactly.
But I don't have to roll it to hit.
I can't think of a wand that has let us know in the comments if there's a wand that needs to hit roll. I'm pretty sure all the wands, if they replicate a spell, they just do what the spell
Which
does.
is very nice.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so magic items is one thing you can do. You can discharge a magic item. If, like I said, you have, or you could drink a potion, or you could cast a scroll. It doesn't talk about if I start reading my scroll and I get hit, does the spell get failed? You could argue that, but it doesn't say that. I don't recall necessarily by using it. You could be attacked and still get the scroll off. Is the idea? Even though there is a number of segments it takes to read a scroll.
Oh, can I go back to wand? So I can wand into melee, no problem.
Absolutely,
no problem.
With
right?
a wand of magic missiles, absolutely, you can be
Or
blasted.
for most other ones, unless there's a right, unless there's
well, wand of fireballs would be something you'd want to be careful with.
Agreed. But so let's say that I've got a wand of flesh to stone. I can wand that. I can use that wand into melee. I'm not doing that melee missile. It's not treated like a missile attack.
No, it's not.
It's very nice. Okay.
That part's really good. So magic items. So here you're starting to see some advantages and disadvantages. So spellcasting combat, not so great. Magic items, good in combat. Certain characters, because of their hit points, should be they're not as well. That's why when I was kind of teasing Dan when he was having Pixie run into battle, he had 2 hit points with leather armor. Glade had 7 hit points, so 3 times the amount of hit points. So
yeah, but I was almost
part of the strategy of that. So that's the basic of what you can do, right? You can attack, you can move, attack, cast spells, use magic items. Now we start getting into some of the special things that enhance the game, and part of that's conditions. And this is where the wargaming elements of the game kind of creep back into Dungeons & Dragons. So, we just spent this time talking about how the battle is dynamic, and Dan's characters and the goblins are kind of dancing around. Well, then there's this idea of rear attacks, flanking attacks, and parrying, which is basic bonuses or subtractions to your ability to hit or be hit. So maybe you can describe the difference between a flanking attack and a rear attack.
Well, it's fortunate that I'm a former wargamer because I think in hexes and
right.
So a flank attack would be from the side, right? Yeah. And a rear attack obviously would be from behind, and you're going to get different bonuses.
Right.
Right. I mean, I know that sometimes the creature being attacked will not get bonuses, so to speak, right? They won't get a dex bonus or a shield bonus, right? And perhaps you could talk about, I'm not as well versed on the specific. I think you lose. Right,
so rear attack, so a flanking attack, this is on page 70. All flank attacks negate any defender's armor class addition for shield. Now again, this is where on your player's character sheet, Goldenrod player's character sheet, it says which hand is your shield hand, or weapons hands is in which hand. Because obviously most people, if you don't say, it's assumed that most players are right-handed then, so you're left-handed. So if you attack from the flank, if you're attacking from the rear flank, it would be this side, you wouldn't get your shield bonus. And
so you would get, so if I had the shield on my left hand, would you give my shield bonus for a flank attack on the left?
That's right. Now if it's a rear flank, because again, depending on facing, and there's a chart, this is where if you've moved away from Theater of the Mind and you've moved to, it shows for each size character how many other characters can get around it. So in this case, let's say a medium character can have 8 medium, I think they can have 8 medium characters around them, or 6 medium characters around them. I'm trying to find where that is exactly. But, and it shows you the flanking of each of those areas.
Oh yeah, it's on, I think, 69 number of opponents per figure.
Yeah, there it is. That's right, 69. Thank you very much.
So because I like to think in kind of charts and groups. So flank attack is going to be a negation of the AC. The shield, right? The AC addition for the shield, which is of course is a +1. So
it could be more if it's magical. Yes.
Oh, correct. So if I've got the shield on my left hand, then what you would play it is for a flank attack on the left, I'm still fine.
That's right.
But on the right,
that's right,
I lose the shield.
Correct.
When it becomes a rear flank, which is obviously in between the flank and the rear, then I am also losing I assume I would lose, even on my shield side, you would say I lose my shield.
That's right, because they're attacking the back, not all the way behind you, to be on the sides of you.
And I lose any dex bonus.
That's right.
And then from the rear, right, it's obviously you're going to get no shield, no dex, and a +2. So it moves in steps. It's sort of like it's from you lose shield, you lose shield and dex, you lose shield and dex, and it's a +2 to hit.
Back to that theme of your armor class is the best it's going to be, and then it moves down from there.
Right.
Not like when you attack, this is the best thing, and then you get penalties.
And bad AC means high AC.
That's right.
So in other words, a 10. So if you're a new player and you're the Magic user and you see a 10 AC,
that's
you're,
awesome.
woohoo!
Nah, that's garbage.
That's the worst.
That's the worst.
Negative 10.
Negative 10 is the best.
It's awesome.
Yeah. Negative 10 is you're virtually unhittable.
Okay.
Right. So those are the initial conditions. So if you're fighting, and this is where it skews towards using miniatures so you can see, this character's in front.
Right.
And again, when you use squares, it's a different scenario than when you use hexes. So again, looking at the from a square perspective, you have 3 people in the front, 2 in the front flanks, and then 3 in the rear is the idea. For a typical medium versus medium, or now small versus medium, more small creatures can obviously attack a medium creature, more small creatures can attack a large creature. If you're a beginning dungeon master, I wouldn't get too stressed about how many number, but you get a general idea of things can attack 8 to 1 basically around it. You have 3, 2, and 3 behind it. So those are for conditions when both parties are fighting normally. Then you have conditions based on we talked about surprise, where you don't get your dex bonus, and you may not have a shield. One of the things you have to keep remembering, we didn't talk about this during rest, and during we haven't really talked about some things when the party rests and they put people on watch. Well, if the party gets attacked, not everyone's going to have their armor. So some people may just have their shield if they're waking up. Only the people on watch would have armor. Don't forget that. So if you're so we talk about surprise. Then there's held, sleeping, or stunned, prone, and motionless opponents. And the Dan and the Dungeon Master's Guide, they go over that on page 70 as well.
Yes, and there's also it's also on page 67, right? We also have some modifiers too, right?
Yep.
Which is can create. I know we've talked about this, that we had to reconcile some of this, right? Because so in 67, if you're encumbered, held by one leg, off balance, etc. Encumbered, that's an interesting one. Because if you're encumbered, so if you're playing by encumbrance rules, which I think most people don't, but if you're playing by the book and you're using encumbrance, and you reach the level of encumbered,
you get no dex and you get B+2 to hit.
Right. And then if you are stunned, held by both legs, slowed, or partially bound, it's +4.
And that's interesting. Slowed, I don't play. I got to keep remembering that if you're slowed, because normally we just do the one. They lose half their attacks. Slow is a spell that makes you move half the speed, and I forget to keep adding the +4 for slow. I'm glad we read that again.
Yeah, I'm sure your players will be happy that we're doing this. If you're magically asleep, held, paralyzed, held meaning by the spell, not like just physically held.
Hold person,
Right. Paralyzed or totally. Anytime you see anything in italics, not anytime, but most time you see something in italics, it usually means it's a reference to a spell.
Yes,
right?
That's right.
In these books. Paralyzed or totally immobile, it's an automatic hit. And then how does page 70 add anything to that?
Basically, you talk about flanked and rear, then you have surprise, you lose dex. If you're slowed or encumbered, you get bonuses. And then finally, the worst thing that can happen to you is if you're held, or magically held, or sleeping. So one of the most powerful spells the beginning level magic user has is sleep. They cast a magical sleep. The creatures are slept. And at this point, bad things. Surprise is bad. Being magically held or slept is as bad or worse. And the reason being, during combat, if a creature is magically slept or held, any creature that attacks them attacks at twice their attack rating. So if I normally get 1 attack, I get twice attack, and I automatically hit, which talks about it on page 67, as you said. Magically held, asleep, paralyzed, or totally immobile, automatic, and the creature attacking gets multiple maximum damage.
So this is why I think, and I had always thrown out this idea that I had, which I think was not entirely accurate, which was this idea that if you're playing with the hit point 0 to -3 as unconscious as opposed to dead, I had always been throwing around with much authoritative inflection that if you are hit, again at 0 to -3, it's automatic death. I think what I probably had done was I'd probably taken these rules and basically been like, well, you're pretty much dead, and transferred it. Because what's going to happen is if you're playing that rule, and so let's say you're at -1, you're hit by the goblin, you're laying there at -1.
Right.
The goblin goes to hit you again. Well, you're unconscious. So what is it? You're unconscious.
You're unconscious.
Then? Is it +2? Is it still got? Is it automatic? So
no,
would it be?
It's your emotionless opponent. Which would be +4 to hit.
It's your stunned, held, slowed, or partially bound. So you think it's a +4? It's not.
That's right. Only because it specifically says.
But it's interesting. Yeah.
It specifically says magic.
Or totally immobile. Why wouldn't you be totally immobile if you're unconscious?
Well, because unconscious doesn't mean you're dead. It just means you're out. You could still potentially writhe around a little bit.
You think?
Yes.
Okay.
You could adjudicate that, but the thing is, it's stunned, held by both legs, partially bound.
Because you're not.
But again, that says automatically hit. I don't mind the automatically hit. You could either say it's +4 automatic, but it doesn't do max damage.
But it does say you're all right. I mean, on page 70, it then refers to it motionless opponents.
Do you want to be nice to them or not nice to them? That's
well, really no, and you're right. I mean, it is. You're not. It is interesting why motionless is considered different than held.
Yeah. Well, the key is magically slept or held. You're literally there's this thing that's holding you there, as opposed to natural.
I might. So what you're so like if I'm asleep, I might like roll over.
Right.
Okay.
It's the same thing of they in their thing to attack you. They make a sign, and just before they strike, you hear something and you wake up or you move. Yeah. Or if you're like my wife, you flail around sleeping. So whatever.
So the downside is it's not on. So but if you're at -1. If you're at -1 and the goblin decides to attack you again, which I'm not saying the goblin probably isn't going to attack you, but
But other creatures will.
But in the movies, when you hit somebody and they go down, you can see the goblin. Let's say there's combat over there. Go ahead and takes a stick. If the goblin decides to do that, it's going to be a +4.
That's right.
It's 2 attacks instead of 1, correct?
No, it's not.
Oh no, I'm sorry.
That's only for magically slept or held.
Oh, that's right. Okay, sorry. See, I'm getting confused. Okay, so it's +4. Is there any extra? Is that it? Is it just +4?
That's
There's no extra damage. Okay.
It's +4.
Okay. So it's not as bad as I thought it was. So
but they get no dex, they get no shield, and they get +4 to hit.
So they're probably going to hit, but there's no extra on damage or anything like that. Right. And so you got a shot of still living, but you're not looking good.
Because again, part of it too is to hit is you're not focusing on just killing that person. There's other combat involved. Because again, if combat was over, you don't have to roll to hit, because you'll have plenty of time to kill the person.
Right.
And it even talks about that in magically the number of attacks. Otherwise, such opponents may be automatically slain. So the idea is, if you're not fighting, you can just kill magically held creatures one thing per round. Right.
So I think you're right. I think the real thing to focus on is the person magically held or not magically held.
And are you in combat or not? Because if you're in combat, the idea is someone may take it. If you're just focusing on them, someone could take advantage and attack you. So that's why you're still keeping your guard up. If you think that's great, that's up to you.
Okay.
All right. So and then you have the situations of charmed creatures. One of the things that always makes it interesting. So you cast a spell. The magic user casts Charm Person or Charm Monster on the other party, or you get charmed. Then that leads into the things we talked about last time with encounters. How you role play. That can be the challenge of combat is there's this idea of what's called a death spiral. So let's say there's four goblins and there's 4 player characters and they're evenly matched. Well, when one character gets hit and they can't fight anymore, now there's 4 attacks hitting the party and there's only 3 going back. And eventually it's 4 against 2. So this kind of snowballing happens. So when you charm person, you flip the script. You go from 4 on 4 to 5 on 3. At least at a minimum, that charm person is not attacking you. Another thing is, if the spellcaster says protect me and one of the parties attacks the spellcaster, the guy who's charmed is going to attack that. So these kind of spells they change the scope of the battle, and you go from looking like you're doing well to you're not. So the last item is turning, the ability to turn. It's a clerical ability. Undead creatures are typically evil in nature, magical in nature, and clerics, through the power of their deity, it's that exorcism from the movie. The power of Christ compels you, in kind of deals with the undead or devilish or demonic forces, and depending on the level of the cleric and the power of the undead, the cleric basically makes it to hit roll, or a version of it to hit roll, and the higher, if they meet or exceed the number they need, they can either turn, meaning the creatures repel from the idea of the vampire and run away, or if they're evil clerics or chaotic neutral clerics, they can have those undead will join them. And we had a situation in the game that Dan ran. We went from we were totally dead. I was pulling out my dice to roll to making a couple of good rolls, and now we're in good shape because six ghouls and 4 skeletons have befriended the party, as opposed to killing us. And this is why, so ghouls are absolutely deadly. So that's turning. Any comments on turning from your perspective?
Yeah, so a couple things. So if I recall, the DMG at 65 and 66 talks about turning, and I believe it is for, right, there's a certain amount of rounds, and there's an amount of time, right, that it is. I'm trying to look for that. I think it was like
5 seconds, I thought, to turn it takes, but that's typically.
I was talking about how long the creatures are turned. You mean the amount? Oh, that's interesting. I had not thought about the amount of time it takes.
I think it's 5 segments.
Oh, I had always assumed it was just a single segment. That's certainly the way I was playing.
From 3 to 12 rounds is the turning effect.
How long they'll be fleeing for. So the dungeon master needs to remember to roll. I mean, obviously, the players shouldn't know that.
Yes, 3 to 12 rounds.
Yeah, where was that?
It's on page 76 at the top, under good clerics.
Yeah, why? Of course, why would I be looking at turning undead? Why would you find that there? Right, so yes, because you've got more on the combat table. Again, one of the tough things about the DMG, things are kind of scattered on places.
He didn't want you to miss anything. He didn't want you to all be in one place where you just read that part. There's such a panoply, yes, of information. He didn't want you to miss it by just focusing in one area.
Right, exactly. So, that's not less than 3, not more than 12 rounds. Right. And so, for people who aren't familiar with the concept of turning, you described it a bit, it's like the classic holding up the cross of the vampire, and they're repelled, as James talked about. So they will move basically as fast as they can, right, away and try to get to safety. And so a lot of times that's sitting in a corner.
Right.
Now, the next thing is, and the DMG sort of alludes to it, I think in Dragon Magazine it was mentioned for sure in Sage Advice, which is this idea, and I think this is the way most people play it, which is that if you attack turned creatures, they're not just going to sit there and die. They're horrified, they want to get away, but they will fight to save, well, it seems weird to say the undead to save their lives.
Save their unlives.
Save their unlives. They will fight. And so this is sort of the breaking the turn, right? So if you sit there and you attack them, it's game on again, right?
Yeah, the only part I say that is that doesn't break the turn is if it's an opportunity attack, which we'll talk about fleeing. So if creatures are fighting each other and you turn them and they turn and run, any opportunity attack. Now, if you pursue them or you corner them and you attack, then you can adjudicate the breaking of the turn because they are not just going to hover in the corner and then get slaughtered.
Yep, I agree with everything you just said.
So turning is, again, that's a game changer. And this is where if clerics don't remember this, ghouls and skeletons and zombies, they're tough by themselves, but if you have a cleric and they're successful in turning, that changes the dynamic. And
you can keep going. So if you fail, you fail. But if there's a group of undead and you succeed, and so you're going to turn a certain amount, my understanding is you can try again then, right? As long as you've been successful.
As long as you've been successful.
Right. Okay.
And there's 2 ways to do it. You can either start bottom up or top down. So some Gary guy says, you could say, well, if you didn't turn the highest level one, the rest of them don't turn because they're under the control of them. So I would argue that would be more like a vampire or a specter, some really intelligent dead that's controlling the minions. Other ways, you start from the bottom up. So if you have ghouls, zombies, and skeletons being the weakest, ghouls being the highest, you roll, okay, I affected the skeletons, and in the next round you could try to go after the zombies, or you could go and then go after the ghoul. So what that gives the DM is a little thing of they all just don't run away right away.
And when you're really high level, they just turn to dust.
Yes,
right?
or
They can.
They can be destroyed or turned automatically.
And we've talked about in a prior podcast about how there's no discussion of how neutral clerics turn.
Right.
And so Polyhedron said that if you're lawful neutral, it's as a good, chaotic neutral, as an evil,
Yep.
which can be a lot of fun.
So we've kind of gone over those main things. So let's try. Now we're at ending combat. So the easiest way to end combat, of course, is one party slays the other party, or the other is there's a thing called morale. If you have non-player characters in your party, and or the monsters, at some point the dungeon master would have to determine, based on how the fight is going, to determine how much fight they have. Most people, we tend to run this, and this is not, I think, correct, that monsters are just going to keep fighting to the death. They're just mindless, and skeletons will do that, zombies will do that, but goblins, they want to live. They have small goblin babies and families. They have stencils of their lives, and they do not want to just die horrible deaths. So
it's always sad when you kill the goblin and you pull out the wallet and you see the picture of the kids, isn't it?
Something from Goblin World where they went as a family,
right?
They have and more. What's even more tragic is the card saying, I'll be home. It's the 10th anniversary.
Right. See you tonight, honey. Love you. The little
right.
note from
the
the wife.
Note from the wife or the spouse as they came back. It's going to be the best. This will be our best year ever, and
you're making me sad just thinking about it.
And you've just slaughtered them. So. And this is a tool for the dungeon master morale, because if the combat is just going to be a slow grind, there's not a lot up, just have morale. And if the morale fails, and there's a chart in here that describes how morale is adjudicated, and I wish it was simple, but it's not, and it's on page 67, and it talks about basically it's a 50-50 chance that they'll stay or not, and this is one area where, depending on the role, there's a graduation of failure. A lot of things like saving throws, save or die. You save, you live, you don't. This one, depending on your role, the reaction of the morale failure could go from falling back fighting to surrender right then and there.
Yeah, and you said it's not simple. So I think this is one of those rules that it's not hard to follow. What makes it complicated, though, is that the amount of time you got to spend adding up all the numbers.
Right.
So it's not like, I can't figure this out. This is too hard for me. Right. But it drags it. Okay, everyone, hang on. Doing a morale check for the monsters. Yeah. All right, hang on. Just breaking the action.
That's right.
Sit down, relax, guys, because I got to do all these numbers here and figure it out. And I think that's what's I think when people complain about the morale check and say it's hard or complicated, whatever, they don't necessarily mean it's rocket science. It's just it's cumbersome.
For all the variables that you could do, there are. I created a spreadsheet, and even then it took about 40 seconds because I had all the things. Yeah. Are they over? How many characters are killed? So anyway, so as the action is going, unless the creature is mindless or focused on kill or be killed, the dungeon master at some point would start rolling morale. And it will determine whether they're going to continue to fight or they're going to start withdrawing or surrender. And so you have surrender, which is one choice, where then you go back into parlaying and in the normal encounter. Our group does that a lot. If creatures surrender, Dan does this, and we tie them up, and we kill them at some point, or we set them on fire and throw them things. All these other great actions that we do, or You may not accept their parlay, their surrender. People run them through, depending on the role playing. So that's one action. One of the other things it talks about is fleeing, disengaging, retreat, or fall back fighting. So unfortunately, in the Dungeon Master's Guide, it talks about fleeing, and Dan learned when he was playing Glades and Pixie that fleeing is a terrible choice. Why is it a terrible choice?
Well, because they're going to get this opportunity attack.
They get an opportunity attack. If you're engaged in combat, so for instance, the goblins are fighting, they realize maybe there's one goblin left, and they fail their morale. They're like, I'm dead because these guys are way better than me. I'm going to flee. That means they turn around and run. Both Pixie and Glades get a free attack, add a rear attack at +4. So it's a +4. And at a rear.
So what's the better thing? Is it a withdrawal, like a fighting withdrawal or something?
Right.
So let's say you're in big trouble.
So they have fallback fighting, disengage, retreat, and flee and panic. Well, flee and panic is you flee, you get the automatic attack.
What page number are you?
On page 67.
Thank you. Okay.
So it says morale failure. So if you fail between 1 and 15 points, you get fallback or fighting, and then 16 through 30 is disengage, retreat. So,
so I was fleeing in panic.
yeah, you were fleeing in panic. So, so what's interesting in the player's handbook, because again, which came out before the Dungeon Master's Guide, in the back where it talks about combat, the participants in melee can opt to attack, parry, fall back, or flee. Now, in the Dungeon Master's Guide, there's no discussion of what fall back means. It says in here, falling back on page 104, falling back is a retrograde move facing the opponent and can be used in conjunction with a parry. An opponent creature is able to follow if otherwise engaged. So but it doesn't tell you how to do that. It doesn't say how fast you can move. It says basically if I'm going to disengage, I'm going to do a parry and I'm going to basically back up. But it doesn't say how fast you can back up. If you flee, you move your full movement. So what I do is I say you can move half movement, assuming someone's not behind you in your way.
What's a parry? I remember I see, what is it? Dodge, parry. Wasn't there?
So parry
Donald Duck or something like that?
in the player's handbook, a parry is, and I think it's in the Dungeon Master, parrying disallows any return attack, but their strength to hit bonus is subtracted from the opponent's to hit die. So if you are a fighter who has exceptional strength, or you're a player character who has exceptional strength, and you get +2 to hit, you can instead use that +2 to put a -2 on the person.
Oh, what page were you at?
That's on page 104.
Oh, okay. So that's probably, so the lesson there is that's probably the better move. The fleeing in panic is not, if you're in big trouble and you want to disengage, right, fleeing in panic is not necessarily.
Right. The challenge with that is when you, at the end of the combat, if you don't surrender or the party doesn't surrender and one starts running, then you have what's called a pursuit scenario where one party is trying to pursue and evade the other party, and so that's on page 67.
So okay, so can I just, so the parry, you know, 104, a player's handbook. So that is basically designed to, you don't want to attack. It's like, come on, cut it out.
Right.
Right. Someone's attacking you, much smaller, and you're just dodging the blows. I don't want to kill this guy.
Right. I'm
going to let him just try to hit me. And then the fallback is doing both of those things. I'm going to fall back
and withdraw.
And withdraw. So the parry would be an unusual one, just a parry alone. You're just sort of standing there, and I envision, like, I'm going to use this when somebody's small. I don't think it's going to do. I have 80 hit points.
Right.
They have 4.
That's the nice way.
The goblin's jumping up at me, trying to hit me, and I'm like, I want the goblin alive. I'm going to parry.
Yeah, or that's one scenario. The other scenario is you're fighting something that needs magical weapon to hit.
Oh.
And you can't hit them.
So I'm just laughing.
Right.
So I can't hit them. They need a magical. Okay.
You're fighting a white who needs a +1 magical weapon or silver weapon.
I should parry and fall back on this one.
Right. You have no way to hit them. Maybe the other characters are using magic or something, so you're trying to take the tension from them. So you parry, so they have less likely chance to hit you, and instead other characters hopefully have a way to hit them.
So how quickly do I miss? So the problem with a falling back, though, is I can be followed pretty easy, right?
Well, because it doesn't say how much movement it is. It clearly, the way you have to read in between the rules is fleeing says you can move at your full movement away.
Right.
So fleeing, withdraw has to be some less than that, and I've said it's half that. So in the case of Pixie and Glades, maybe they move half, which is 6, but if the goblin moves 9, well then in their action they could move 9.
So it sounds like that's useful if you are in melee. So you're a magic user and you find yourself in melee and you're like, I need to get out of here.
Right.
It sounds like the falling back is better.
Yeah.
Because I know I'm probably not going to be followed if there's a melee happening.
Right.
I'm just getting out of the melee.
Right.
If it's one-on-one, maybe fleeing in panic is better if it's one-on-one because you know they're going to be following you and if you're faster. But if you're just trying to get out of the melee, fall back. Got it. Okay.
And it gives advantages to people like monks who are very fast. So moving, if you did say half movement to withdrawal, their half movement still may be faster than the other person's movement, so you quickly could get away. And so in your case with Glades, for instance, because she moved at 12 before she had armor, and she had a bow, and the other didn't have range weapons, she could have ran back 120 feet, shot. Then the goblins can only move 6 and keep moving farther away. Basically, keep a distance between
the goblins and them. So she could move 12. The goblins would move 6. She could shoot. If she won initiative, move another 12. Basically, keep distance from the goblins.
Oh.
And because once you disengage,
with the falling back.
Right. Well, falling back, she could have moved half her movement.
That would have been the 6.
That would have been 6. If she won initiative, then she could move 12. But she wouldn't be able to hit. The issue is she would not be getting hit at that point. Because in Glade's scenario, she moves back 6. The goblins then take their action. Well, the only action they have is they can move 6. So now it's initiative again. So as long as she keeps winning initiative, she could not be hit and continue to move.
Oh, because they're beyond 10 feet at this point.
That's right.
Because I'm thinking I move 6. Well, that's within 10, but no, it's not really. The 6 is 60 feet.
That's right. They have to move 6. Unless they charge, they'd have to move 60 feet.
If I win initiative, right? So let's say I'm in trouble. I'm with a goblin. And I'm in trouble.
Right.
What I want to do is I probably if I know I'm faster than the other side, so I move back. Hopefully, I want to win initiative. Obviously, if I don't win initiative, it doesn't matter.
And this is the advantage, like you said. What do I get for winning initiative? Well, this is where, remember in the last one, you get advantage because you can fall back. But if you don't use this kind of rule that's talked about in 104, you have no choices. Winning initiative doesn't do. The only thing it does for you is avoids the goblin attacking you first and then the opportunity.
And the good news is the reason why it's better than fleeing, of course, is because if I do lose initiative, then it's not the opportunity to attack.
You get attack first, then the opportunity attack. You get twice attacked. Yeah. If you lose initiative, the goblins hit you.
I'm falling back.
And then falling back, you just move back 6.
Right, but I say I lose initiative, so I declare I'm falling back.
Right.
We roll. You win initiative.
Then I attack, and then you fall back 6.
Oh, and does anything happen?
Well, you would be parrying. So if you had a strength bonus, that would be used against it.
So I guess that's my right. So that's right. So parrying really is particularly helpful if you have a strength bonus. So if I had a strength bonus,
which makes sense that fighters would be good at parrying and everyone else would be crappy at it.
I'm never going to remember any of this. I'm going to re-listen to this a billion times.
Well, that's okay. But this is a good segue into strategies for combat. Before we continue, so there are rules on page 67 for evasion, pursuing. I never use them, but they're interesting.
Yes. These are basically, I want to flee from the baddie, and the baddie is going to hunt you down and kill you.
Right. But there are some good things, and two of the things that they talk about, the things you do need to consider, that I think I don't do a good job with and I'd like to, is the thing you talked about, food or money. If the players say, I'm running, and they throw bags of money, there's a chance, or food, there's a chance that some monsters will stop and take the money. Again, have the monsters be smart. Most goblins are wimpy. They're going to take coin above trying to fight creatures unless they think they absolutely have a chance to win.
Well, that's why they were trying to kill you anyway, probably, to get your coin.
That's right.
This is perfect.
So if you throw, and you don't have to throw 10,000 gold pieces, and that's where the DM needs to be.
Start slowly.
Right.
See how it goes.
That's where the DM needs to be reasonable and not know that metagaming works too. If I know you're a 5th level magic user and there's 3 goblins that are attacking you and you start running, they don't know you have a staff of power, where they wouldn't have that 5th level, but they don't know you have a wand of lightning. If you threw 50 gold pieces, that's going to be awesome. They don't need to know they have, but I know you have a 5,000 gold piece gem on you. They're going to strip you and take all the money. No, if you take 100 copper pieces and throw in some coin, it breaks open the ground, they're going to stop and get that first and then let you go because they assume you're not coming back. And food's the same thing.
I learned a recent adventure where you guys were faced by a bunch of evil dwarves or something, and it wasn't looking good. You guys got out of it. The magic user to sleep spell, but basically they basically wanted all of your stuff, and I think John's or something. Oh, so this is basically it's a hold up.
Right. Exactly. It's a hold up.
What does that mean? Are we?
No, that's someone was calling me. But yeah, we're getting.
Is that our first calling?
That's right. That was our first. Like, why are you guys still talking about this?
You need to move it along.
That's right.
And you've gotten a lot of the rules wrong.
That's right. Okay. You're telling everything terrible. So, going to the next part, which is, so this lends into the strategy of first edition, and it's really not talked about in the rules itself. So I want to, the couple of things we talk about. Some of the tropes that all these games have come from this idea that fighters are in the front. The strategy should be fighters are in the front, and they should always try to attack either the strongest things to break through the enemy's lines, which would be the strongest fighters, and get to the squishy characters, which are the magic users, and clerics kind of roll. And then thieves, their job, because they're not great fighters, is to sneak around and attack the the wimpy characters, primarily the magic users, because the magic users, because they have powerful spells, just one whole person from a cleric can take out 3 of your fighters, and they've had 70 hit points, and all of a sudden they got none because they're getting rocked. So this is where I think players really need to understand the flanking rules, which creatures are a threat onto this. One of the things that the party didn't do, they had 3 stone giants. So what happened was they were going down this corridor, and they had piled up the dead giants and ogres from the previous battles, and the party, in order to get out, had to climb over this. And in the room there was ogres, and in the back there were stone giants. And stone giants throw boulders for 3 to 30 hit points of damage, more than if they attack, it's only 3 to 18 with melee hands. But if they throw, and they can throw up to 200 feet. So basically there are this artillery, and the players basically got stuck right as they climbed over the dead bodies being attacked by wolves and stuff, and these giants just had free reign. And one of the characters unfortunately fell because he got hit 7 times by stones. And I was playing an NPC of the characters, even though I was running because one of the players didn't come. Well, as soon as he had a chance, he ran next to the 3 giants so that they wouldn't continue to throw rocks, but instead attack him. So that's some of the strategy that people need to think about. Not just sitting face to face. If you've got magic users or casters, you've got to take them out. Again, understanding fighting withdrawal. If the battle's not going well, don't flee. Start doing that withdrawal so that you can get into a better position. Don't be in an open area, because if the other group has a lot of characters, a lot of monsters, you don't want them. You want characters by themselves, because then they could be surrounded, and then the most horrible thing could happen, which is, of course, weaponless combat, which is one of the optional rules that we're going to talk about. So that's some of the strategy that players need to think about. Almost like the Battle of Thermopylae, where you can fight thousands of creatures as long as you're only fighting 30 at a time.
And I understand thieves on backstab. You can't backstab as a thief if the potential victim is aware you're there. Is that correct?
That's right.
Okay, so you could try to do what, like a roll? You try to do like a hide in shadows and a move silent. I mean, so maybe you could real quickly. I know we've talked about a lot of other things too, because I know that the thieves in combat, that's kind of their thing. I want to backstab.
Right.
How does that go down? How are they able to do that? What rolls do they need to make?
So if your rules is written, they have to the victim has to be unaware and surprised of the attack. So there's no real mechanic about it. If you play it as written, it's almost impossible for a character to get a backstab. So in order to make this worthwhile, what we typically say is, if they sneak around the back, and basically they have to do because again, hide in shadows only works if you're stationary. If you're moving, you hide in shadow. So you'd have to say you're coming around the back, and you'd get into a rear position, and then I have them make a move silently roll, which kind of rolls into the fact that they're creeping up silently behind them, and they're going to strike their back attack. But if they've been at any time observed by either the creature or someone who's smart enough to go, hey, there's a thief behind you, because again, what's good for the monsters is good for the players. Because if you're going to allow the thief in the party to go around and sneak, and even though all the other monsters saw that you're doing it and they're totally oblivious, and they allow the person to get stabbed, well, then that's going to happen to your poor magic user. Well, I saw the thief, yeah, but the magic user didn't see it. So you have to play it both ways. But it says just a successful surprise back attack. It has to be surprise. So the idea is it has to be from the rear, so you get your +4 to hit, just like a rear attack.
Would you get the +4 anyway? So because a rear attack gets you +4. So even if you fail, let's say I fail my move silently roll,
right, you'd still get your rear attack.
I'm always going to. So that's not a backstab addition. That's just a rear attack.
Right.
Correct. Okay.
The advantage of backstab is you get the rear attack, but then you get double damage.
So the double damage
or multiple damage depending on the level you're at.
Right. Lower level. Right. Would be double. Right. So okay. So that's the advantage of the backstab.
Right.
Is the double damage.
That's right.
Okay. Okay.
So I think there's a lot more to this, but we're coming up on things. So let me talk about a couple of things that we didn't get over. So I talked a little bit about surprise. That some of these things you're going to have to balance. how much rules is written, how comfortable your party is, and how quickly you want to get things done. I think if you practice surprise and some the weapons, these other things, you can make it work. But if you only use it occasionally, it can grind the game down. So surprise is one of those areas that some DMs like myself simplify it, but you certainly could play it as written as long as you actually read what it says. Another area is simultaneous initiative. In my game, just to make it easier, if both the party and the players and the monsters roll simultaneously, I just have them re-roll until one wins because I don't want to have to deal with it.
Okay.
But rules is written, it talks about simultaneous initiative, and there are certain rules that happen. Number one, this idea of weapon speed comes into a thing. So what is weapon speed, Dan?
So weapon, if you look in the player's handbook and the list of weapons, each weapon will be given a speed number. And if I recall correct, lower is better, isn't it?
Yes, lower is better.
On this one.
That's correct.
And so what happens then is if you have simultaneous initiative,
yep,
then if you have a weapon on weapon attack, to both parties
right.
have weapons, then the party, if I recall correctly, the party with the lower weapon speed factor
it goes first.
Goes first on page 38. And if I recall correctly, too, is it's possible to get multiple attacks, isn't
Right.
it?
So if it's a simultaneous attack, and I'm using a dagger versus a longsword, in this case I think a dagger is a 2 weapon speed and a longsword's 5, you could rule that the dagger goes twice would go twice in that simultaneous attack versus the longsword. Now again, this only is a factor in simultaneous.
Correct.
It's not used in that. So that's why people don't use it. It seems odd. It's like, why don't you use weapon speed all the time? Well, because that's rules as written.
And it's only when it's weapon on
weapon. Right.
Though if I recall correctly, a fist or open hand is a weapon.
That's right.
Now you may say, who cares? But it actually came up in one of our games, right? That it is a fist or open hand.
Page 66.
Does that mean that is that a creature? So if it's a creature, that's probably when it came up. If you've got a creature that's using claws, would you consider that a fist or open hand for weapon speed factor?
No.
You would not.
No.
Okay.
I would say it doesn't count at that point. That is just a normal thing.
Okay. And the other time too, and I got to tell you,
unless they're a fight, unless they're a humanoid type thing, like a goblin, that would be a fist, but not a troll or something like that.
Okay.
Because then you get multiple attacks and it gets really crazy.
And let's not forget about multiple attacks. That if you have multiple attacks, you're going to go first on your first attack.
And that one we did skip over that during melee attacks. So multiple attacks makes things even more challenging. So if a creature has 2 attacks, they're supposed to go in the beginning of the round and the end of the round, regardless of initiative, because the fact is they're faster and more attacks. So yeah, weapon speed, it gets factored into simultaneous initiative. There's also, depending on if weapon speed versus a character who's casting a spell is another situation. So if I'm casting Magic Missile, which is 1 segment, and you have a longsword, which is 5 segments, or weapon speed of 5, and I won initiative, my Magic Missile would go off, but if I was casting Hold Person or something that takes longer, if you had a dagger, you still may get a chance to hit me beforehand.
And this is the other one, and I had not been aware of this, where this is the other situation which weapon speed factor is determinate, right? If you look at the bottom of page 66, I didn't even know about this. Whereas it's a weapon against somebody doing something else.
Yes, that's right. The main one is magic user, but yes, absolutely.
Right, anything. And this apparently is not based upon when it's simultaneous, right? I don't think so. It doesn't say. So it's any time, and it's you got to crunch the numbers here, right? You compare the speed factor of the weapon with the number of segments, which the spell, but you could play spell with any other action.
Anything that has a time to launch. So turning, using a potion or anything like that. Yep.
And you subtract the losing die roll on the initiative die roll. I'm not going to go through this, right?
So it's on page 67.
The weapon factor and treating negative results of positive. There's a long. I don't think a lot of people know about that.
Right.
So that's the other time.
We're getting to super crunchy stuff.
Right. Most people ignore that, but by the book, you'd want to know about that.
And then there's armor type. So the idea of back to this human on human, or not only do you have an armor class, which is your general way of protection, but then you have an armor type. So for instance, if I'm wearing chainmail and shield, that's armor class 4. But let's say I have a great dex. So my armor class could be actually better than that. It could be lower, maybe AC 2. But from the perspective of an armor type, I have chain and shield, which would be AC 4. In the player's handbook, there is a list of weapons and their advantage or disadvantage to certain armor class types. So some things against armor class 4 type creatures are better. So a fist and open hand against a chainmail and shield is -3 to hit, which makes perfect sense. You punching someone in armor, it's going to be less likely to hit. And so a bow stick, which sounds like a stick, is -5. But a bec de corbin is +2 to hit. So it feels right. Like certain weapons should be better against certain things.
Right.
But now you're adding another thing to it. So you could just see the scenario of simultaneous initiative against fighter versus fighter. One has a bec de corbin wearing banded mail. Another person has padded armor with a longsword. Go! And figure all that out. And this is only one part of the game. And most people just go, ugh, I'm not going to deal with any of that.
I remember the very first game we ran with the new group that we started about 2 years ago. I remember we were using this, and I remember one of the players rolled his eyes like, oh, you're using the AC adjustment. I think, though, I'd like to argue for it.
I argue for it. It's great.
No, you did. It is, because it does make it more realistic.
Even though it's a fantasy game. Attention.
Realistic for a fantasy game. Well, you know, I believe that, you know, Bob Costas, he said this show later with Bob Costas.
Mm-hmm.
It was a wonderful show. I remember he talked about how with movies, you could accept one thing. Let's say you have a movie time travel. You can accept that. But the more unrealistic things you add, then you're like, oh, I'm out.
That's right.
So, in other words, you know, yes, it's an unrealistic, gnomes, halflings, I can buy, magic, I can buy into it. But then, you know, at a certain point, you've got to make it like the real world or you're losing me.
Right.
So I'll give you certain things. And I like this. I like these tables. I think what you have to remember is, in the DMG somewhere, I'm trying to look for it, talks about this is only against armor. Or I think, as you brought up in another game, I think that's what I was looking for, the DMG, maybe if a monster has a hide or something that is armor-like.
Yes.
But generally, this is not just any AC.
Right.
And this is, it does include shield. It doesn't say it, but it has to include shield because it has a 9.
Right.
And I don't think there is an armor.
No,
with a 9.
that's your armor type would be that. That's correct.
So it's your armor type plus shield.
That's right.
And I think the way to make this easier is you've got to give this to the players to figure out.
Right.
So I don't have a problem with telling players what the AC as the opponent is, because at this point in time, if you're playing a 1E game, you're probably not playing with the person who doesn't know the monster manual from A to Z. Yeah. Your players know they know roughly what the armor class is. They have a sense of it. You're not giving anything away. I think you tell the players, hey, this is an AC 7, so you're responsible for looking up.
Right.
When things slow down is when the DM, who's trying to do 9 things, is asked to do more things.
Yep. And I think that's a good point. And I think that's where you have to have players who want to, you know, Gary Gygax talks about the players who want to improve their game. And I think, you know, depending on the group you have and the dynamic, you may not I guess my thing would be, don't introduce all this at once. You don't have to do all this. You can just do the basic roll initiative and fight and go back and forth, and you'd be good to go. But as your game gets better, you can add more features if your players are willing to support it. Because if they're not, and every time they're rolling and they're going, did I hit? And I said, well, you hit the last time with that, and we're slowing things down. That's when it's a challenge. So, and then I'm just going to say weaponless combat is broken. There's rules about it in the Dungeon Master's Guide. All kidding aside, it starts on 72 and 73. The Unearthed Arcana made an update of it, which we won't talk about. But if you want to talk about slow, there's basically 3 kinds. You can pummel someone, you can grapple them, which is hold them, or you can overbear them. Basically the idea of like the halflings stands underneath the giant, pushes him over. We never use it.
And I think slow is absolutely right. So my guess is it's not rocket science.
Yeah.
If I sat down for an afternoon, I would understand it, I hope. But it's cumbersome and it's long. And it's a buzz killer. you have combat, it's all exciting. The person says, I try to grapple.
Right.
Time out. All right, hold on. What's you're talking? The people are pulling out their cell phones.
Right.
They're checking them. You're doing the percentages, and then at the end of it, you roll like a 99, which would have been. I don't know if that's good. Honestly, I have no idea if that's good or bad. I have no idea because I don't know these rules very well. But like, it's clear it's something. You didn't need to crunch all those numbers, and everyone groans,
Right.
and yeah. So.
And so for me, if they are going to do it, but that seems like it should be part of the game. It should be a great part of the game. And especially if you're a dungeon master and you want to challenge your players with goblins after they become 5th or 6th level. If they can't fight with those creatures, they can't fight with the players. They'll mow them down. But if 6 goblins jump on a fighter and try to grapple them, well, that would be great because now they're prone and now they get advantages. So you've got to figure out a way. So my version of this is you want to learn the rules. There's definitely a way to do it, and you just have to commit to it. I just do as simple as, well, you want to grapple, roll d20. If he rolls high, then we'll figure out what happens. And then I'll probably make a guess of, what did you try to do? I try to grab his arm. Okay, you rolled an 18, the guy's wearing leather, yeah, you grab his arm.
And I think most players are relieved when the DM says that. If the players know the grappling rules, unless you're a real stickler, they're happy because it's going to keep things moving. And let me mention something real quick, too. This thing about, number one, only monsters, I'm kind of thinking back things we talked about, only monsters do morale check. Party never does. That's up to the party to decide if they're going to flee or surrender. The great thing about surrendering monsters, your party's been very effective in using this, is if they're surrendering, you can pump them for information.
Yep.
Don't just kill everything and then say, which way do we go? Capture them, say, which way should we go? Look, you don't know if they're telling the truth or not, right? But try to get some information out of them. You can use them. Hey, you guys are great at this. You open that chest. Yeah. Let's use them as the red shirts, as the fodder, and so that can be very effective. Should we talk briefly and quickly about the death rules? Because we talked about melee and a lot, right? So
okay, we did not talk. I mean, we talked a little bit about it in one of the camp modules. Yes.
But when am I dead? So I'm in melee. When am I dead? When is the monster dead? There's really basic, I think, kind of 2 different ways, at least by the book, that you could do that. I know a lot of people house rule stuff.
So typically, if you're at 0 hit points, either monster or player character, the player or monster is dead. And there's an optional rule that Gary says in the Dungeon Master's Guide that up to if a blow takes a character down to up to -3, they still survive, but they're not dead. Anything beyond that kills them automatically. If they get to 0 or below and they're not stabilized, open quotes, they lose a hit point per round, assuming they're not attacked anymore. And once they reach -10, they are then dead at that point. Monsters, typically, once they get to 0, they are dead at that point.
And so my understanding is the way many people interpret the 0 to negative if they're going to use it. And I understand that the optional rule was added by Gary Gygax, I believe, because of the concern about the high mortality rate for first-level characters. And so if you go to -3, it gives you a chance to survive, a greater chance to survive. And my understanding is the way most people interpret it, if you do the -3 is still unconscious, is that a single blow, so if I'm at 1 hit point, and I'm hit by the goblin, and I suffer then 5 points of damage, and I'm right, so now I'm at, -4, that would be, I'm dead.
Right.
But if it just brings me anywhere between 0 and -3, I'm unconscious. If you bind me before I get to -10, I'm stabilized.
That's right.
And I live, so.
That's it.
Okay.
Yep, and there's another fun rule that if you get to -6 or below without dying, get resuscitating, some horrible disfigurement should happen to you. It talks about it in there too. So unfortunately, one of the characters yesterday got pummeled by a number of stones, and after I think he had 22 hit points and received 27 hit points of damage, and that brought him to -5.
And that was it. And unfortunately, if you are knocked unconscious and you are brought back, we've talked about this before, you have to spend, a week. You can't do anything, really, no real action of any kind, and then you got to rest a week. So you're kind of out of it for that adventure, unfortunately. You don't just pop up and start adventuring.
Now, one thing you could do later, you could have your spellcasters research a spell when they get high enough level to maybe create a spell that if you cure near death's wounds or something, where it brings them back and they don't have to wait a week, because the only way to do that is through heal, which is a very powerful spell. And in later editions they came up with this death's door, which is a 3rd level spell, which it brings you back to 0, and you're able to function at that point normally. But as rules is written, 1st edition, if you get unconscious 0 or below, and you're brought conscious, you're in a coma for 1 to 6 turns, and then you are unable to do anything significant for 1 week.
No, I think as I described in the last game, you're basically you're the guy walking with the IV.
That's right. Yeah.
Walking along. That's what you can do.
So the last thing, just real quick, is there's someone, and I didn't get the person's name, but I'll put it in the description. There's this thing, Attic, which is what the AD&D something combat thing. It's and there's a PDF out there, and this person did a great job sourcing, going through all the books.
DM Prada, I think.
DM Prada, that's right. DM Prada, and I'll put the link in there as well, into the podcast for the and it's about a 15-page, and it's done a great job of trying. If you want to try to run combat rules as written, he's probably 95% of where you want to be. You may not want to be there because it's still very complicated.
You may be 120% of where you want to be.
Right. It's a great. He did a great job. Great examples, but
Absolutely.
I don't know if it makes it easier. It makes it clearer, and it makes you. It combines a bunch of rules and texts and goes from surprise through combat, and provides matrices between if someone's casting a spell versus charging, and I use that to kind of supplement if I've got a good group of players, and if we want to take it to the next level, that's definitely a document you should look at. Okay.
And he's got examples, which is great.
Right.
He writes out all these examples, illustrations. So yeah, I completely concur.
Yes.
With your recommendation.
This is not even the suggestion. So now we've talked about comments, and then put in the comments or either on YouTube or send us a Twitter at GROGTALK if you have things we've missed or we said wrong. We don't want to give out false information. So now it's our suggestion segment. And so I guess I'll go first. I'm going to cast suggestion on our audience by telling them to get online Dragon 74. So here's my original copy of Dragon 74 that I'm showing to the fans here.
Very nice.
It's kind of jacked up, but why?
So from back in the day. So no, you didn't go on eBay and buy this recently. This is the one
This is the one I had from 1983, June of '83.
So you never had one of those moments like, what am I doing playing this game? I'm washing myself of it. I need to be an adult. I mean, we're getting a lot of nasty comments, aren't we?
No.
I am.
Oh, yeah.
I'm throwing all this stuff out or abandoning it. I'm moving on. Fortunately, you never said that.
No, I didn't. I just gave it up. I just stopped doing it.
But you kept all your stuff.
I kept some of it. What happened was we played with a group, and all our stuff kind of got conjoined together at one point.
Of course.
And I ended up, I don't really remember how, probably the last time we played, we kind of just took stuff and threw it in each representative cars. And what I had in my car is what I ended up with 25 years later.
That's great.
So for instance, my player's handbook is my original player's handbook because it still has, for those online, it still has my name right in the old things we pushed it, the old basically labelers.
Yeah, it was a big labeler.
Yeah, you it had the little dial. So mine's still in there, but my Dungeon Master's Guide is not my original one. So I have some of it. But this Dragon magazine, I remember each of us bought a copy because what I'm really suggesting reason is because in Dragon 74 they had the combat wheel. And I'm showing it to our friends on live. This is the combat wheel from Dragon 74. This is the official Dragon magazine. And so what it does is it allows you, instead of looking up the charts, it has an inner wheel and outer wheel. The inner wheel, you select the armor class of the person or the target. And then the upper wheel, and on the lower wheel, it has bands for each type of character that you're fighting. Magic user, thief, cleric. So so Dan's character is fighting a goblin, AC 6. You shift it. He is a fighter, first level. He needs a 14.
Very nice.
He's a first level cleric. He needs a 14. And if you want to use weapon adjustments for armor class 6, you can just look, club -1. So it has it right there.
Very nice.
So this is the combat computer. So what my other suggestion is if you go to a hobby store, because we used to have just used like a paper clip to hold this together and it would get all jacked up. And I've thought about laminating it, which I would definitely recommend as well. But if you go get one of these grommets from like a Joann's or Michael's craft store, You put it in the middle, it then spins. If you do it right, it spins without damaging.
We could do a separate segment like D&D and crafting.
Yes, well, I know I made my own Dungeon Master screen, and I'm not very crafty, but
No, all evidence to the contrary. Yes, it's impressive.
it came out pretty good. So there's you don't need to get the Dragon Magnet 74. There are PDFs of it. It's just more work because then you have to print it out and cut it and do these other things. But it is very helpful to at least make some of the crunchiness go away, particularly if you're going to try to use armor type and you're not fumbling in charts. You can quickly go, all right, minus. And it's good when the character says, okay, my AC 0, but I'm next to the paladin, so I get -2, and you just move it down to 2, and that kind of thing. So that's my suggestion. Dragon 74, you get the wheel. Dan, what is your suggestion?
And before we go on, because you,
Hopefully you fail your save.
You had a great idea. You know, you talked about so many of the books now that we're buying, people like me, that we buy the books. They were other people's books, obviously, because they get them off of eBay. It would be great a project to reunite players with their old books.
That's right.
Like Ed Dormady.
Yeah.
Look, guess what he used too? Look at that.
He did the same thing.
He did it. He wasn't happy with which one came first. Was he not happy? This one must have come first.
Yeah.
And then he's concerned that the white would come out. He wrote his name. So
we all use the sticker labels, yeah?
So if Ed Dormady could call in,
right?
If he would buy a DMG for me that is of equal quality, roughly, I will trade him. I will reunite Ed Dormady with, if he's still alive.
Yes. Now that's depressing, but yeah.
Reunite him. And my player's handbook, if MEC is out there.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know how you're going to, you know.
Who is that person? But maybe that could be a feature on Twitter that people could take a picture of their inside of their book and post it up there, and then someone could try to figure out who these people are.
We should have like a lost pet site.
Right.
We should have like a reunite. We should do a site for reuniting
old books
with their players, like lost pets.
I think at some point, you know, we would have to hope that some people are not with us anymore, because then there wouldn't be enough books for people. Because obviously, if everyone got their books back, there'd be people who wanted books. But we'll worry about that later.
No, I think there's been an attrition rate. Just like in true 1E fashion.
That's right.
Yeah.
There's been player death.
So I'm casting suggestion and suggesting that you read something by Matt Finch called A Quick Primer for Old School Gaming.
Oh, wonderful.
Right, which you know I posted on our meetup site, a link to it. I think it's very short, 12 pages. I think that's short.
It is short.
And it describes what old school gaming is like, the difference between old school gaming and new school gaming. So I think this is very useful for somebody who only knows new school gaming, maybe a younger person who wants to play 1E, so they're not startled by what's going on. But I also think it's really useful for people who have been playing a long time and are very familiar with 1E to read it as a refresher of what it really is supposed to be like. I don't know if you remember this book, Strunk and White, this little book about writing, little thin book, and you know it's good to read it once a year because it to remind you what good writing is.
Once a year?
Once a year, I think is what they say. Wow. Okay. Is that a lot or a little?
I think thin. Once a decade would be impressive.
It's very thin.
Well, I don't think I have.
I think you should read this, you know, periodically, just to remind you what old school gaming is like. He talks about these different Zen moments, that it's rulings, not rules, which I know is interesting because we talk a lot about by the book.
Yeah.
But old school gaming, a lot of times, is there's no rules on anything. Hey, what's my percentage chance to do this? 60%. That's very old school. Other things that he reminds us, there's not many, I think there's only 5 Zen moments. It's player skill, not abilities. So we've talked about, hey, I want to find the secret passage. What's my, not a secret passage or whatever, I want to find something. Well, what's my percentage chance? Can I roll an ability? No, you tell me what you're doing.
Right.
Where are you looking? That's different than new school.
Yeah, manipulating the objects in the room versus just saying, what's my stealth or my perception check?
Exactly. Heroic, not superhero. So you're going to be low level, you're not going to be a superhero, you're going to be a low level guy. You're going to do heroic things. You're not going to be a superhero. Forget game balance. We've talked about that, right? Yeah. You've got so it's very important. Probably the most important thing we talked about today is the difference between a fighting withdrawal or whatever it is that the parrying and all that versus a flee, because you should be doing a lot of that,
right?
Because don't expect to. It's fair game to have a vampire when you're first level. It's not fair game to expect you to be cornered by the vampire and fight the vampire, right. But it's fair game to have a vampire because you can run. And so
Except when you're trapped in a chapel you can't get out of, and the only way to get out is through the way the vampires. But that's another story.
that's a different issue.
Yeah.
Actually, it looks like there's 4 Zen modes. But so I think I think it's a very good write-up. I think it's good just to read it, absorb it, and remind you of the way old school gaming was supposed to be.
Well, wonderful. I hope they fail their suggestion too. So, we're at the point where either if there's anyone still listening, they're like, please end this thing. But I've learned a lot about combat. Please, if we missed something about combat area, info at GROGCon or at GROGTALK on Twitter. We're on YouTube. We are on Google Play, iTunes. Please like and subscribe either on YouTube or iTunes. Please put a comment on there. We'd like to know what we're doing. We know we have people listening. I'm also going to ask for requests for pictures. I know this is shocking, but this is not a poster here. So if you want your artwork, maybe of Pixie and Glades fighting the goblins,
Pixie being eaten. I knew that was coming.
Pixie being eaten by the goblin. Put a picture of what has happened to Pixie.
I see a lot of pictures of scythes or whatever it is.
Scythes, that's right. Them dodging the scythe, hitting the scythe. Maybe it's a scythe right here picture pointing at them that they should have paid attention to. Any of those would be great. So because we want, and also let us know what future things you want us to talk about. We're thinking about having some guests. We need to kind of work out some of that as well, get them either on the show or record them. So we've got a lot of things coming up, and hopefully not next week, but the week after, we'll have an update on GrogCon at Crucible. We'll have some more information about that. So until then, I'm James.
I'm Dan.
Thank you for listening to GrogTalk, and we'll see you next week.